Welcome all to the last week of the NFL season. That is right. We are here to preview the Super Bowl preview between the Kansas City Chiefs and the San Francisco 49ers. We're also here to preview all of the Pro Bowl lore that we had across last week, everything that you're desperately missing there, as well as some NBA news and, of course, some coaching hires. But we are here for the big day, the big bowl, the Super Bowl preview.
Yeah, the Super Bowl, you could argue outside of the World Cup, it may be the biggest day in sports. It's definitely the biggest day in sports in America, but it's kind of surreal that we're at this moment, you know?
Yeah.
We get through the entire NFL season, and then all of a sudden, it's championship weekend. You have two games, and then you're like, oh, wait. What do I do this day on Sunday where I don't have anything to do? I know you chose to work so you could boycott the Pro Bowl because it's made for mildly entertaining elementary school level people who just want something where they can see their best players run around the field. Like, I get it. You need to have something to watch while you eat your Kraft mac and cheese at home. And then I went skiing to avoid this Pro Bowl, so that was fun this weekend. But we are here, and this may be one of the best rematches of all time in Super Bowl history. I don't know how often we get a chance to see two teams that have previously played in a Super Bowl go head to head, a couple years removed. Now we have a different quarterback in San Francisco. We have a different running back in San Francisco, and it seems like to go from just having your number two receiver be Brandon Ayuk, and you could argue it's Deebo Samuel now, and he's the Swiss Army knife for that team, being injured, and having Christian McCaffrey now. And then you have someone like Brock Purdy who showed he could come back from being down 24-7 against a really good football team and lead his team to victory. Whereas with Jimmy Garoppolo, they kind of just ran it every single time against the Green Bay Packers, and he didn't really have an impact on that win, where the Lions game, Brock Purdy had his imprints all over that game, and then Patrick Mahomes, and now that defense having their imprint all over that game versus the Ravens, with Steve Spagnuolo now with the Giants disrupting Tom Brady, now disrupting players like Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson repeatedly. These are two very different teams. We go from a Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce high-flying offense, and now it's more of a Patriots team. And how we saw those Patriots teams where it was, we have high IQ guys who are interchangeable at every position on defense, and they have the smarts to do it together, and they'll make a big play. And then we have Patrick Mahomes, where if you don't bet against anyone currently in sports, it went from Michael Jordan, it went from players like Kobe Bryant, Tim Duncan, Tom Brady, to now it's Mahomes. It's like you have a really hard time picking against him because he is that guy, and he has that relationship with Travis Kelce. So two very different teams, and I think this is going to be a very different matchup than what we got the first time.
I agree. I think that you're setting up for a classic where I think that this 49ers team is better than what we saw in 2019, where you have a number one running back in the league in Christian McCaffrey. Their running back is definitely taking a step forward. Their wide receivers, I think, are a little bit better. Rather than your number two being someone like an Emmanuel Sanders, who is definitely on the last legs of his career, now you have Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel, whoever you want to argue is their number two. And then they even have someone like Juwan Jennings there. George Kittle is still there. They still have some solid foundational players who haven't left yet, especially on that defense. They added Chase Young there. Diamador Lenore has stepped up since then. And then on the other side, like, I think if you're talking about Jimmy Garoppolo compared to Brock Purdy has shown to be more clutch. He's shown to be stepping up more in the big moment. And he's shown that he doesn't make those costly mistakes as much as Jimmy Garoppolo does too. So for the Chiefs, we know what the Chiefs are. You know what they've become, and how Patrick Mahomes is someone you don't bet against, especially in a year where everyone said they were vulnerable. But on the other side, you have the 49ers, who are definitely a better team since they were in 2019. And a Chiefs team that on paper might not look quite as effective, but that defense has shut down everybody they've faced so far.
Yeah, that defense has shut down everybody that they've faced so far. And then you have someone like Steve Spagnuolo, who just is able to adjust throughout the game. And he's probably the most valuable coach who isn't a head coach in the league. It's basically him and Lou Anarumo when we talk about defensive coordinators in the league at this point, just with what the Bengals and the Chiefs have been able to do. And then you look at just how the Chiefs are embracing being the villain. I mean, Patrick Mahomes is like, okay, if you want me to go away, I'm not going to do that. And if you're going to bet against me, I'm going to go into your stadium and take away all joy, all hope, all happiness that you had. And I'm not just going to love doing it, I'm going to enjoy doing it. And I'm going to take some of that home. And then him and Travis Kelce have really embraced that role. Like, it's mostly about not making mistakes, just making the play at the right time. And then let's let our defense cook. If our defense is just going to chop up the Ravens all game, I don't need to force anything downfield. I don't need to risk throwing it to Martez Valdez-Scantling and him batting it in the air for someone like Kyle Hamilton or Patrick Queen to go ahead and grab, and then we have a negative play on our end. And it really does remind me of the Patriots, because the formula was always that defense, and you have a legendary defensive coordinator on the level defensively of someone like Bill Belichick, because he was the one who's able to help stop that undefeated Patriots team in the Super Bowl with the Giants. He's been able to slow down that San Francisco 49ers team in the Super Bowl when they were down 20-10, and they pretty much needed to stop every single time. So you're seeing that unfold, and then the difference is Andy Reid is so much farther ahead than someone like Josh McDaniels or Bill O'Brien. And then athletically, Patrick Mahomes is just a different beast at this point in his career than Tom Brady. But you can make the comparison to him in clutch time to Brady, and Kelce to Gronk as well, with making the big plays when it matters.
Yeah, and it's at this point now we talk about the Patriots dynasty and what we saw the last 20 years compared to now with the Chiefs. The Chiefs and the Patriots both had the fear factor. And I think that that's something that the Chiefs will have to their advantage when we talk about the Super Bowl and the game itself, because the 49ers, I worry there's this whole meme going around about them coming out to Famous by Kanye West and revving up the crowd there. And as funny as that would be, the Chiefs are a team you don't want to mess with, and they're a team that provides fear in the other opponent. And now at this point, like, you saw what happened to the Ravens and Lamar and how he acted, playing uncharacteristically when it came time in the big moments. And then I think that they're a team that they're good. They've been there. They've been there four out of the last 5 years, and they're a team that are essentially a dynasty at this point if they win.
Yeah, they're a dynasty at this point if they win. Patrick Mahomes been to 6 straight conference championships at this point in his career, embracing a different style of offense this year, especially evolving without Tyreek Hill. It'll be his first back-to-back Super Bowl champion, and then also quarterbacks below the age of 20. He leads now with 14 playoff wins. Right under him is actually Ben Roethlisberger, Joe Flacco, and Troy Aikman, tied with 10 playoff wins under 20.
That's insane.
Yeah, it's a kind of a ridiculous stat there.
I saw that he's third all-time in playoff wins already.
Yeah, already.
The only people that are above him are Joe Montana and Tom Brady.
Yeah, and then we hype up the Chiefs, and we've talked about the Chiefs for the last few minutes here, but let's talk about how special the 49ers have been over the past few years. I know personally, I've compared this 49ers team and Kyle Shanahan to Andy Reid's first stint in Philadelphia, where you have that transcendent offensive mind. You have someone who can draw up a scheme for everything seemingly on defense, but there's always this question mark of whether it's Kyle Shanahan coming into the playoffs being 0-30 when trailing by 4 points or more going into a fourth quarter, whether it's that 28-3 lead in the Super Bowl, or whether it's the only time he loses to Sean McVay is when it matters most in the playoffs versus the Rams. So you kind of have those question marks, but they've been to a Super Bowl. They're in the conference championship seemingly every year. And now, as soon as Brock Purdy steps on the field, it's been conference championship. So with that being said, he's still on a rookie contract. Their media is doing the 49ers a favor and downplaying Brock Purdy, and they may end up costing him money in the end, which is crazy with how much they've disparaged him. But what's the difference with this 49ers team over the past 2 years in getting to a conference championship back-to-back? And is it different with Brock Purdy than Jimmy G? And is he better than the other supposed game managers, as Cam Newton calls, in Dak Prescott and Tua?
Absolutely. When I see Brock Purdy, I see that he can pretty much he might not be as gifted of a passer as some of these elite guys, but he can make the throw when it matters. He's clutch. He's proven that since he stepped onto the field, he's a winner. He's won, I want to say his winning percentage his first 2 years is up there with some of the all-time greats. He's won 4 playoff games in 2 years, which is the most of anybody in NFL history. And I think the difference is he is able to make the throws when it matters, but then he also is able to facilitate like anybody else, where you'll see George Kittle have 5 catches for 50 yards. You'll see Debo have 100 yards. Brandon Ayuk will have 60 yards. And everybody on that offense will end up eating in that same game. And then obviously you have Christian McCaffrey there as another versatile weapon. So I think that the difference between him and someone like Jimmy Garoppolo is Jimmy Garoppolo might force the issue to some of his main guys,
Right.
especially maybe someone like Debo or George Kittle. I know he really liked George Kittle when he played. And so with Brock Purdy, he doesn't have that ego. He doesn't have that, I feel like I need to get it to my guy. He has everyone around him and he'll facilitate accordingly. And because of that, that's why you saw them last year, NFC title game. If he didn't get hurt, would they have made that Super Bowl? That's an unknown, a mystery of NFL football. We'll never know. And then this year, coming back against the Lions, having that game against the Packers, he struggles, but then at the late moments, stepping up and making a play when it matters. I think this team is definitely better than the 49ers team of 2019 because I can trust Brock Purdy more than I can trust Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah, you can definitely trust him more than you can trust Jimmy Garoppolo. And just the fact that he's also helped Kyle Shanahan's legacy throughout this playoff run, because we talked about how Kyle Shanahan wasn't good historically when he's trailing from behind. And you can point to, well, his quarterback was Matt Ryan, his quarterback was Kirk Cousins, Jimmy Garoppolo. And we get that. But Brock Purdy kind of single-handedly changed that narrative, especially in that Lions game when they needed a critical play and they needed a critical third down to keep the Lions on the fence and to keep the momentum on their side and control the clock. He was able to get it done with his legs. And I think that's just a true testament to Brock Purdy. And then just how he talks to the media, how his teammates talk about him. You can tell that when you watch like someone like Tom Brady talk about what it takes to win, he's doing all of the right things. He's definitely the hardest worker in the room. And then people are talking about how bad his first halves were. Well, Patrick Mahomes fell down 24-0 versus the Houston Texans. And what we said was, oh my God, what an amazing comeback that was by Patrick Mahomes. Brock Purdy falls down 24-7. Like, wow, Brock Purdy was really terrible in the first half. I can't believe his team survived him playing that badly in the first half when it was the defense that got cooked and then let their team get down 24-7 when you have Fred Warner, you have Trey Greenlaw, you have Nick Bosa, you have Diamador Lenore, and all of these other great players on your team. And like, yes, Brock Purdy is the only one who is at fault, and they definitely didn't come back because of him. And Kyle Shanahan has always been good in the clutch moments coming back.
You know what Brock Purdy is? He's kind of like the anti-Josh Allen.
Yeah.
When the Bills are losing, it's, oh, that defense let them down. Oh, the receivers let them down. He doesn't have enough help. And then when he wins, obviously, it's all Josh Allen. With Brock Purdy, it's the opposite. When they win, it's because of all the talent around them. It's the defense there. And then when they lose, it's all on Brock Purdy. You saw that 3-game losing streak middle of the season and how much they disparaged the guy. Oh, my God, Mr. Irrelevant. There's a reason why he was picked last. Oh, my God, this and that. He's proven so far in 2 years, whether he was picked last or not, it doesn't matter. I almost feel like it almost benefited him if he was just undrafted, because then you'd have the Adam Thielen treatment, you'd have the Tony Romo treatment, you'd have the Kurt Warner treatment. But instead, Mr. Irrelevant, oh, this guy sucks. He was the last pick in the draft. Nobody cares about him. He's proven that was clearly bullshit. He should have been picked earlier.
Yeah.
And he's proven it every single game that he's played for the most part, with a couple of bad exceptions. But he's proven to be a gamer, and the people who are just disparaging him, it's obnoxious. And we've been avid Brock Purdy enthusiasts throughout this entire time.
Yeah.
And it's just ridiculous. And what's ultimately going to be the funniest thing is if he ends up winning a Super Bowl. Because how are they going to keep saying that at that point?
Yeah, how are they going to spin it there? But we'll get to more Brock Purdy topics later in the show. But let's talk about the overall matchup. Let's talk about what this game means for both teams respectively. So for the Kansas City Chiefs, if Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid win this game, what does it mean for them? And then if they lose, what does it mean for the Chiefs as an organization?
Well, if they win, we're talking about 3 Super Bowls for Patrick Mahomes. So now he has more Super Bowls than people like a Peyton Manning, like an Aaron Rodgers, like a Ben Roethlisberger, like all these great quarterbacks who at one point you could compare to talking about all-time great. We're talking about how he's going to come up on the all-time greats list. At this point, if he wins his 3rd Super Bowl, I don't see how you can argue he's not at least top 3. And that's being conservative. I think you should put him at number 2 at this point. He's shown he jumps off the screen a lot more than Joe Montana did. He jumps off the screen more than Aaron Rodgers and all these other great guys. He wins. He's the 2nd best quarterback of all time. And he is capable of surpassing Brady in all-time rings and all-time just success as well. And then same goes with Andy Reid. I think at this point, he's already a top 5 head coach of all time. He wins that. You could put him pretty firmly in that first, 2nd, or 3rd spot there, depending on your projections there. And I think with like the all-time conversation with him and Bill Belichick, he'll be able to say, I had a better coaching tree. He'll be able to say, I had success with multiple different quarterbacks. There will be an argument there for greatest coach of all time. And then there's obviously some other head coaches with Belichick that can be there too. But
Yeah.
winning, we're talking about a dynasty and we're talking about all-time greats.
Yeah, and I think for Andy Reid, to be in that number, maybe top 5, top 3 coaches of all time conversation, he would probably need about 3 to 4 rings minimum, just with all of the great coaches that you have in there that went on a run and won 3, 4, 5 rings even. So just being able to get to the championship with Patrick Mahomes, have 2 different organizations where you got them 2 Super Bowls, you were in the conference championship seemingly every year in Philadelphia, and now you've been there 6 straight years with Patrick Mahomes, and now you have a chance to be the most dominant dynasty since the Patriots, and people are, as soon as the Patriots dynasty ended, this will never happen. How could this ever happen again? Well, how does that happen again? You have an all-time great head coach, someone who's the best in his field, someone who has the best mustache in football offensively, someone who is a burger enthusiast, which just generally keeps the morale of the team high. And he's a little bit goofy. He's fun, but he knows how to bring toughness and he knows how to bring levity to a situation. And he also knows how to put the best coaches of all time around him, because you have someone like Steve Spagnuolo. He's like, yeah, defense isn't really my thing, so maybe I should get one of the best defensive coordinators of all time to be on my side right there. And then you have someone like Patrick Mahomes who buys into the legacy, the championships, not just regular season awards, but he's focused on the playoffs. He's not focused on individual stats. He's focused on, hey, maybe the offense shouldn't be as explosive, and I'll get the ball to Travis Kelce when I can, but you may not have 10 targets this game, buddy. And I'll just check it down to Isaiah Pacheco, who will run mean at the ground. And I'll even semi-trust Clyde Edwards-Helaire at times, which is definitely what someone like Tom Brady did and someone who are the best winners in sports do. So you have to have that agreement with your quarterback and Andy Reid, and Patrick Mahomes had all the talent in the world. You're seeing how good he is right now, and he's like, I'll sit a year behind Alex Smith, Mr. Average, the definition of a slightly above or below average quarterback. Alex Smith, the definition of, yeah, he's probably somewhere between 18 and 14 year in and year out. He had the humbleness to sit behind him and be like, okay, I'm going to learn, soak up as much information as possible, and then I'm going to come out my rookie year in my second year in the NFL and go toe-to-toe with Tom Brady. And I lost in overtime, but I'm going to go right to the Super Bowl the year after that and win it.
Not only that, his first year he throws for 50 touchdowns
50.
and 5,000 yards. Very first year, wins the MVP, goes on this absolute tear, has one of the best seasons, not just of basically a rookie quarterback of all time. He had one of the greatest seasons, period.
Yeah.
And it ultimately came down to an offsides call. But very next season goes back, wins the Super Bowl. And then ever since then, he's been in the Super Bowl for the last 5 seasons.
Yeah, and you want to talk about how much of the media are kind of whores and hoes for the sport and how they flip-flop day to day. They're like, oh, that's shiny, I'll follow that object, and then fall off a cliff. Well, Patrick Mahomes instantly shattered Aaron Rodgers' narrative about being the most gifted thrower of all time. Well, it's like, well, it helps when you actually come up clutch with those gifted thrower of all time skills. And Patrick Mahomes showed like, hey, this is no fluke. It matters that your coach and your quarterback are both all-time greats. And the Chiefs kind of, if they lucked into it, well, a bunch of people passed on him for Trubisky, Deshaun Watson. Matt Nagy was definitely a contributor where he gave Patrick Mahomes the plays the day before in draft so he could help him like get to the Chiefs there. But credit to Matt Nagy, I guess, for creating the next dynasty.
Yeah, absolutely. We had players like Mitch Trubisky, who was passed up with, Solomon Thomas. We're talking about John Ross taken right before him for the Cincinnati Bengals. And another team we should thank for them, which nobody is really shouting out, is thank you, Buffalo Bills, for trading up to allow the Chiefs to take Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
And you guys did up getting Tre'Davious White and some Deion Dawkins of the world, and that's awesome. I hope those guys have treated you very well, and it looks like they have. But thank you, Buffalo, for getting Patrick Mahomes in a Kansas City uniform because, obviously it's panned out very well for them. So thank you for the person who has given you all these issues all these past several years. You are the one to blame.
Yeah.
But here they are.
Yeah, here they are. And then we talked a lot of positive if they win. What if they lose?
I feel like it's not going to hurt them too much because he still has 2 Super Bowls. Everyone else, we're looking at 1. It could hurt his GOAT legacy because I know Brady lost
Yeah.
3 and he lost to Eli Manning twice and then he lost to Nick Foles. So it won't necessarily hurt his all-time rankings. I still feel like he's second best all-time in my eyes,
Yeah.
but it will hurt his when he talks about the GOAT conversation. I feel like it could be something they use against him.
Yeah, I definitely think it'd be something that they use against him, but you're also going up against the best roster in the league. But my only argument against it was I think the Chiefs should win this game just because look at the teams that the 49ers kind of got ran over by the Packers, and then you came back in that game. You got ran all over and thrown all over in the first half against the Lions, and then you came back and won that game. Is it going to be the same formula versus the Chiefs? And if so, I just don't see Patrick Mahomes blowing a game in that fashion or their defense letting their offense come back against them in a situation where the 49ers fall behind again. And I just think Patrick Mahomes has ice in his veins and wouldn't let those plays happen.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
you can't fall behind if you're the 49ers in this game. And if you're the Chiefs, if you get ahead in this game, I think that's the best thing for you. But I'd like to see another comeback victory from Patrick Mahomes in like a Brady-esque sense. And I think that could happen realistically.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Especially if the 49ers start out hot, they get maybe a score or two. Because I think even with the Chiefs now, even though they're not necessarily as high flying as they were with Tyreek Hill, I still think being up 10-0 against them doesn't give you comfort at all.
Yeah.
Because they can still come back and score very easily, especially with how great their defense has been this year with the Nick Boltons of the word, the George Karloftises, the, Drew Tranquils and everyone else there. Obviously, Chris Jones as well. L'Jarius Sneed.
Amenahue, yeah.
Exactly. Willie Gay. So a lot of great talent there. So for them, even if they fall down 10-0, they're not fazed by it whatsoever.
No.
So I think that's a good thing there. And then as far as like if the 49ers win, this is obviously going to be a giant monkey off of Kyle Shanahan's back because now he has as many rings as Sean McVay. You can bring up that conversation again. Who is the better coach all time and who's better really just in the current state of things? And then for Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant is gone at this point. He now has more Super Bowls than Drew Brees. He has more Super Bowls and has as many Super Bowls as Aaron Rodgers at this point.
Yeah.
And people are probably going to make the narrative if he wins. Is this going to be Patrick Mahomes, Eli Manning, or Nick Foles? Which I feel like would be a little mean, but that's probably the narrative that will come from it.
It could happen, though, because you could realistically see the 49ers getting back to the Super Bowl against the Chiefs just because Brock Purdy's getting paid so little at this point that it gives the 49ers so much flexibility to sign him either at a discount or just acquire more talent. So if the Chiefs are on the same trajectory as they are, I could see in like another 2 or 3 years Patrick Mahomes going back up against Brock Purdy. And it could very well be like an Eli Manning type of thing because Brock Purdy just seems like one of those guys who just goes out there and wins. And of course you have a bad 3-game stretch throughout the season, but who hasn't? Patrick Mahomes lost to the Indianapolis Colts with Frank Reich in his last year. Like bad losses just simply happen in this league. So I think with the 49ers, I don't expect them to win this game, which is why, like, not a ton of grief there, especially their defense worries me with how they've gone up against these elite teams in the NFC. But I think for Brock Purdy, then you start entering the conversation. Okay, your first year playing, you got to a conference championship. And then the next year, when you weren't injured and knocked out of that championship game where we had Christian McCaffrey trying to play quarterback, you went straight to the Super Bowl and beat Patrick Mahomes after he just demoralized and sent Lamar Jackson into the sunken place, destroyed the Buffalo Bills with Josh Allen. Now his contract's kicking in, and then just beat the Miami Dolphins at home, sent Tua to the shadow realm and made everyone question, is Tua actually a quarterback who can show up and play in a playoff game in the NFL?
Yeah, exactly. So all the gauntlet he's gone through, and then inevitably to lose to Brock Purdy.
Yeah.
Brock Purdy is going to be somebody that you have to take seriously at that point because he's going to have more Super Bowls than someone like a Joe Burrow or a Jalen Hurts or all these other guys who they're going to put in that conversation above them.
Yeah. And then, well, I say enough gushing about how amazing and how football is the best sport, how good both of these teams are, and how this is the two best teams over the past, not just this year, but the past 5 years in the NFL, really. And then 6, if you count that first year with the Kansas City Chiefs. As soon as Kyle Shanahan took over, these are the two best teams. But it's time for our predictions for the Super Bowl, the biggest sporting event in the world this month, if not history of the universe and when it was formed, when the Big Bang happened, when it was created, whatever you believe. This is going to be the biggest event in 2024 history. So get tight. You're about to be the oracle for this game. What are your initial leanings? What are your thoughts when I say Kansas City Chiefs, San Francisco 49ers, Super Bowl in Vegas, headlining with Usher at halftime?
So I got my magic ball right here. You can't see it. It's off camera. I look to the future. I see the 49ers get out to an early lead, but only for a short period of time because Patrick Mahomes III gets the ball, does what he does best, former baseball player, former Red Sox father in the stands. The Chiefs, the Kansas City Chiefs, that is. They win their second straight Super Bowl. Taylor Swift and all the Swifties rejoice with a 4-time Grammy-winning Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce in there as well, cementing himself as one of the greatest tight ends of all time. Andy Reid solidifies himself as one of the greatest head coaches, and Patrick Mahomes officially firm at that number 2 spot, all time being the GOAT. Kansas City Chiefs win their second straight. Patty Mahomes enters that conversation, and that's how I see it happening here. I see the 49ers scoring first, getting a bit of a lead, and then maybe there's some fourth quarter heroics from Patrick Mahomes, or maybe they just come back in the second half. But I think that the Chiefs inevitably win this game and submit themselves in history.
Yeah, I agree with that premise. And I do think the San Francisco 49ers come out hot, but Steve Spagnuolo is able to make some adjustments with that defense. And what really worries me with the San Francisco 49ers is how their defense played versus the Lions, versus the Green Bay Packers. And you may say, well, those teams technically have better weapons, but they don't have Patrick Mahomes. They don't have Andy Reid, and neither of those teams had even been to the playoffs. Those are two of the youngest teams in football. This is a veteran Kansas City Chiefs team. They're going to be able to make plays against that defense. They're going to be able to look at the tape and see what happened there. And then you have Andy Reid, who is one of the greatest play callers of all time, with Patrick Mahomes in that game. So I think the 49ers probably go up 10-0 to start this game. Christian McCaffrey, and then the defense starts to slowly slow down the San Francisco 49ers, and then we are history buffs on the show. And the reason why I cannot pick the San Francisco 49ers is because no team that has lost to Kirk Cousins in the regular seasons has ever gone on to win a Super Bowl. And with that being said, I can't see the San Francisco 49ers snapping that out of place. I can't see them rectifying history here with the great players on their team. I do think it's a close competitive game, but just the curse of Kirk Cousins will live on. But if not, we'll see history be made in this game. But I think the Kansas City Chiefs win it 26-24.
I like that score. I'm going to go right around the same there. Go with that same score. I think that they're going to come back. I think Patrick Mahomes is going to have a big fourth quarter drive, and they're going to win their third Super Bowl in the last 4 years, and have Patty Mahomes getting a second straight Super Bowl.
Yeah, second straight Super Bowl. And then according to Stephen A. Smith, they can officially be a dynasty because he said at the beginning of the season, and he reiterated it on First Take, I can't call the Kansas City Chiefs a dynasty until they win back-to-back Super Bowls, because apparently every dynasty has, the Spurs never won a back-to-back
the Giants of 2000s.
The Giants of the 2000s. So the Kansas City Chiefs will officially be a dynasty after getting to 6 straight AFC championship games, but we'll see what happens on Sunday. Everything can happen. I just can't see the Kansas City Chiefs passing up this opportunity. They're really embracing the role of being a villain, but I'm excited for this matchup, and honestly, I don't care who wins, and I just want a great game all around, and I don't think either of these teams are capable of getting blown out at this point with this much time to prepare.
No, I don't think so either. I'm pretty indifferent. I know there's a lot of people who are anti-Chiefs because of the Taylor Swift coverage and because of them being as good as they've been the last several years. So I understand when people feel that way. And then the other side, the 49ers, I liked the 49ers this year. I like Brock Purdy, and I think that he has a big opportunity to shake off this Mr. Irrelevant nonsense and really shove it to the media who's
Yeah.
giving him absolute shit, whether it's the Get Up team, whether it's the First Take teams, or whether it's even former quarterback, former current NFL legend in Cam Newton,
Yeah.
who's constantly been calling him a game manager. Whether that's an insult or not, Brock Purdy has words to say.
Yeah, Brock Purdy has words to say, and Brock Purdy's like, yeah, I am a game manager. And if you look back in history, not comparing him to this player, but this was always the argument against Tom Brady. It's like, well, he wins. All he does is get to conference championships. All he does is get to Super Bowls when he's healthy and win. He's a supreme winner that's always able to come back and make a big play at the end of the game. But, you know, we like Peyton Manning better because he has better statistics, better talent. But wait, Brock Purdy threw for 44 touchdowns this year and 11 interceptions, but it's the same exact, oh, well, Tom Brady was picked last in the draft. Tom Brady is Mr. Irrelevant. We're always slandering him. And then Cam Newton's like, yeah, Brock Purdy is a game manager and he's not going to win you a game. I'm like, really? You're a running quarterback. Did those runs versus the Detroit Lions when he was down 24-7 and he was icing third downs and picking up crucial downs to keep the ball in their possession with his legs? Did that look like a game management whereas within the offense? Or did that look like he was improvising, adding on to the offense, being an extra layer on that layered cake that is the San Francisco 49ers offense that can hit you through so many directions? And then we're like, oh my God, Brock Purdy can run. And that's another advantage. And he's made it to a conference championship year in and year out. And then he's just asked about this question. And he's like, yeah, as Lil Wayne says, a real G's moving the silence like the G in lasagna. And that's what he's done. And all of his teammates love him. You can tell he's focused on the mission and it doesn't bother him. And then Christian McCaffrey, Trent Williams, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, all these guys do is hype him up. And you can tell he has all the confidence in the world. And then you talk about, well, he had a bad half versus the Packers. He had a bad half versus the Lions. Like, you know how many times I've seen Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers and Ben Roethlisberger and Joe Flacco and Russell Wilson and Drew Brees and Peyton Manning all have a bad half? He's the only guy who can't. Like, really? He's in a Super Bowl right now. What about Dak Prescott? Because Cowherd was saying basically, if he has another bad half and really coughs it up, should Sam Darnold be competing with him for the starting job? And it's like, the guy who is seeing ghosts, the guy that needed to call Bill Murray or Paul Rudd now for the new Ghostbusters to get rid of the ghosts that were in New York that he was seeing, like, that guy is the one you want competing for the starting job just because what? He was drafted higher and he's bigger and stronger. It's like, no, if that was a possibility at all, he would have been competing with him when they brought him in this year to learn that offense. So if Dak Prescott is awful every single time he's on the field, and then he's underachieved in the playoffs, does that mean he's competing with Trey Lance now when he goes into training camp? Because with that logic, he pretty much lost 48-16 until he got all those junk yards in the fourth quarter against the Green Bay Packers. But no, he's not brought up in this. When Josh Allen has a bad half, it's like, wow, look how he overcame all of those mistakes that he made unforced.
Yeah, no, I think it's insane because at this point, why would you mess up something where you've been to an NFC title game and a Super Bowl, a guy who's helped you win these games, come back from all these deficits that you had with the Packers and with the Lions here? I don't understand this thing. I don't know if Brock Purdy has dirt on the media. Is this a Jeffrey Epstein situation where he has all this dirt on Colin Cowherd? He's seen him, he has pictures of him picking his nose or something, or with, Stephen A. Smith and Dan Orlovsky and some of these other guys. Like, what dirt does he have on the media at this point? Because even if he wins this game, people are going to say, like, well, what could have Sam Darnold done? It's like, Sam Darnold wouldn't have done anything. And, it's funny because I was reading an article about how one of the heaviest bets in the Super Bowl right now is Sam Darnold MVP, in the sense that something happens to Brock Purdy, Sam Darnold step in and wins the Super Bowl MVP, which that to me is wasting money at its finest. But that's a whole nother story. I don't understand the slander. Brock Purdy has done nothing but win since he stepped in, and we've been enthusiasts of the show, which is why we are fair and confidential. We have the documents, as we always say, and I think the documents show that Brock Purdy is a good quarterback.
This is not a plug-and-play league. Like, this is not a league where you can just put a guy out there and he's going to go out there and win and be successful just because he has weapons. Like, look at what Aaron Rodgers did when he had weapons in Green Bay. He wasn't in the conference championship every single year. Look at Russell Wilson. He got to a Super Bowl and then he won one, but people were giving Russell Wilson credit on that team just because he was taken in the third round because Pete Carroll benched Matt Flynn for him and got him out of the building. And he's like, no, Russell Wilson is my guy. And then people are like, oh, look how amazing Russ is, even though we have 11 of maybe the best defenders in the league on one team. We've had the best draft over the past few years. We have Marshawn Lynch, who's really the engine for our team with the Skittles, and he's handing them out in the locker room. And then Ben Roethlisberger is another person where I feel like he was kind of the OG Brock Purdy, but no one gave him this treatment because he was picked in the first round. He was the most talented quarterback coming out of the draft, and he had a cannon of an arm, but he still had an amazing defense. He still had weapons all over the place. He still had Bill Cowher. Then he had Mike Tomlin. He had Troy Polamalu on that defense. Look at Drew Brees. He had Sean Payton. He had a bunch of weapons on offense. He had one of the best defenses. Peyton Manning. It's like you go down the list, like, yes, everyone has had weapons who's ever won a Super Bowl ever. And like, why are we holding Brock Purdy to this other standard where we give someone like Dak Prescott a pass? Like, Dak can be in the MVP conversation, but Christian McCaffrey can't Brock Purdy can't because Christian McCaffrey is the most valuable player on his offense. Well, the same logic applies to Dak Prescott with CeeDee Lamb, because anytime CeeDee Lamb isn't on the field, Dak Prescott looks like a shell of himself, and CeeDee Lamb is the most valuable player on that offense, not Dak Prescott. But Dak Prescott's the quarterback, so of course he's going to be the MVP. When you talk about managing a game, yeah, your job is to manage the game as a quarterback and know when to take risks and know when not to take risks. And Dak Prescott doesn't know when not to take risks, so you can't really put him in that game manager conversation because he hasn't figured out how to manage his team into a conference championship yet. You can't put Tua into a game manager conversation because he hasn't been able to manage his team past the first round. You can put Jared Goff in that conversation because he game managed his team to a Super Bowl, to a conference championship, and to another conference championship.
Yeah, I agree completely. And you talk about the talent thing here, and I look at the Cowboys, maybe not this year, but of years past, where they had a prime Ezekiel Elliott, they had Amari Cooper, they had at one point they had Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb, and then they also had Dalton Schultz as a tight end. So, and then also a top 5 offensive line in the league as well. Yeah. Put all that talent there.
Maybe the best.
You can plug and play. If you want to, plug and play Sam Darnold there. Plug and play fucking whoever else. They ended up falling short in the playoffs again, even with all that talent there. So talent is not the end-all be-all there. And there's been a number of examples in years past with all this talent here. Hell, even the 2007 Patriots. I know they went undefeated, but they didn't end up winning the Super Bowl at the end of the day. Yeah. So there's plenty of examples of teams with loads of talent. Hell, even the 49ers the last couple of years when there's injuries with Jimmy Garoppolo and how they fell short. There's plenty of examples. The difference is with these game managers like Brock Purdy, like you mentioned Jared Goff, like you mentioned some other guys, it's like what ultimately means for a game manager is how far can they bring them to the playoffs? And that's what their value comes in with. Dak Prescott has one of the worst playoff percentages of all quarterbacks in NFL history. We have Lamar Jackson in there. Even he hasn't had that exceptional level as well. So it's a load of bullshit what it comes down to.
And he doesn't look scared in those moments. And all he has done is rise to the occasion so far. And like, sure, did he have an interception to Rodrigo? Did he have an interception in the Packers game? But did he bounce back from those interceptions? Yes. And like Brady and Manning, like, you know how long it took Manning to actually win in the playoffs? Like, this isn't a league where all of a sudden you can just walk in and be dominant and it doesn't matter who you have for weapons. So I'm still confused, and just saying, like, should Sam Darnold compete with him? He's the 10th worst player on his team. It's like, okay, with Cam Newton, say you do have a point that he's the 10th best player on his team. He's still the most important player on that team, because if you take Brock Purdy out, you can't just put Sam Darnold in there and then expect to win that Lions game, expect to win that Packers game. Mm-hmm. There's definitely layers to this. And like, sure, at times was Brady not the talent-wise best player on his team? Like, yes, the knock on Brady was like, he doesn't have the biggest arm. He's not athletic, like, at all. At one point, he was struggling to outrun Vince Wilfork. So it's like, yeah, we get it. There are more talented players than Tom Brady, but he's the best player on the field at that moment going up against the guy, and he's the best chess match master, which is really what it comes down to.
Yeah, and if we remember the first three Super Bowls with Tom Brady, it was the Ty Laws that they hyped up, the Richard Seymours, the Mike Vrabels, the Vince Wilforks, the Matt Lights, the Deion Branches of the world. Those are the people that they elevated then. They talked about
Yeah.
how great their defense was because their defense was spectacular. It wasn't about Tom Brady as much. Tom Brady just made big plays when it mattered. He was a game manager for the first part of his career. And then eventually he exceeded that, became an MVP, became a Pro Bowler, and the rest is history. But I think it's a load of shit what people are saying.
Yeah, definitely. And then if he's the weakest link on his team and there's all this talent around him, you can't just be like, oh, yeah, if they lose, Brock Purdy's going to be the reason, when you can look at all these games where the defense let them down, whether it's versus Cleveland, versus Minnesota with Kirk Cousins, without Justin Jefferson, cooked them. You still have all that talent everywhere.
Mm.
Minnesota didn't have a run game. They have one of the worst offensive lines in the league. But yeah, let's blame Brock Purdy. All of that is his fault. But it's kind of ridiculous at this point. But we are talking about Brock Purdy, and the conversation surrounding it is most people just being like, well, he doesn't deserve to be in the MVP conversation. So let's have that conversation about the MVP, go over all the players, and then scroll through some of the other players that are up for awards this year. Give us our take on just the players in there, and then our pick on who deserves to be the most valuable player of the 2024 regular season.
Perfect. Let's go.
So in the MVP, we have Josh Allen with the Buffalo Bills, Lamar Jackson, Christian McCaffrey, Dak Prescott, and Brock Purdy. Any problems with the players in this list? If you could maybe remove someone and add someone in, who would it be?
So these are the names that have been in circulation for a majority of the time. I think that we're talking about value here. I think Dak Prescott you could replace with CeeDee Lamb. That Cowboys team, CeeDee Lamb had one of the greatest runs of wide receivers of this past season, and I think he deserves a spot there. You can throw in Tyreek Hill in the mix here. You can throw in maybe a defensive player. I know
Yeah.
Myles Garrett was in the conversation for us for a while when he
TJ
was really
Watt.
ripping it up. TJ Watt as well. But if we're looking at just strictly quarterbacks, I think even though he didn't have as great of a season, you can still throw in someone like Patrick Mahomes. Look at how much he elevated his team.
Yeah.
But as far as Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Christian McCaffrey, I have no issues with them guys here. If you want to put Dak Prescott in because of the numbers, fine. Brock Purdy, fine. But I think that it's really I would have picked between Lamar and Christian McCaffrey here.
Yeah, I'd pick between Lamar and Christian McCaffrey here. I would give it to McCaffrey just because of the numbers, and I think the value of him as a running back, he's definitely added another level to them. And then we're just giving it to a quarterback year in and year out. It's like there are other players that are more valuable, like case in point, like with Dak Prescott. Like, no, he's not the most valuable player on their offense. If you replaced Dak Prescott with a similar quarterback, the thing that would matter is if you have CeeDee Lamb or not on that team, because CeeDee Lamb is the engine that makes that offense go. It's hard in the NFL to be the best receiver on your team and not really have that many great receivers around you. I know Michael Gallup is hyped a lot, but he's not like we need to worry about Michael Gallup today. And then Brandon Cooks, he didn't get going till week 12 this year. So I think like it's so hard to be that number one receiver on your team. So I think he deserves to be there over Dak. And then with Josh Allen, it's like, can you lose your team 3 games where you can point to that he's the reason why they lost and then still give him the MVP? It's like, I think that disqualifies you from the conversation if you can point to more than 3 games where he flat out just lost his team the game. So I would replace Josh Allen with TJ Watt, because DJ Watt led the league in sacks again this year. He's led the league in sacks 3 years, and you can't get to the playoffs if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers without TJ Watt on that team. That's the definition of valuable. So, and he wasn't losing his team games either. In that game they needed to win versus the Ravens, he had 2 sacks.
Yeah, I think that that's fine there. I think that ultimately Lamar Jackson will win. But if we're talking about of those 5 guys, who's the most deserving? It's Christian McCaffrey. He had over 2,000 scrimmage yards. He is a focal point of that offense. And I think he really elevates that game for someone like Brock Purdy and for everyone else around him.
Yeah.
So of those 5, I think it should be Christian McCaffrey, but it's going to be Lamar.
Yeah. And I don't think this should be like most valuable player in the league, best stats in the league. And I think strength of schedule should be a factor. And I think if you look just on their strength of schedule, the odds that they're up against this season and where they ended up, you should put CJ Stroud over Dak Prescott because he's the definition of valuable. Everyone who watches football is like, oh, he's clearly more talented than him. He had less talent around him. He was walking into a franchise that people called a dumpster fire. And then they made the playoffs and won a playoff game the first year against the Cleveland Browns, who without him just kicked their ass in Houston. And then he came back. You insert him in the lineup and then suddenly they win in a blowout. Like, that's a coincidence? No, I don't think so at all. But then after that, we have the Offensive Player of the Year with Tyreek Hill, Lamar Jackson up for another award here, CeeDee Lamb, Christian McCaffrey, and Dak Prescott for some reason is on this list. Honestly, when I talk about this list, what is more impressive? What Justin Jefferson did with missing time and how he still had the amount of yards he did, or what Dak Prescott did this year? And for me, it's like, he was out for, I believe it was 6 games. 7 games, and then he still had over 1,000 yards receiving, and then he was still up there with the top receivers in the league. Like, you want to talk about dominant, you want to talk about one of the best offensive players in the league, like, that's a lot more impressive than having the most touchdowns in the league, which is what Dak Prescott did this year. But I think it would be between Christian McCaffrey and Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, another person I would shout out for someone who had an injury is someone like Kyron Williams, who missed 5 games and was on pace to have 1,800 scrimmage yards, was 3rd in the NFL in rushing yards. I think he's another guy that you could have shouted out. Of those, I would say CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, and Christian McCaffrey should be in that conversation. And our who should deserve the MVP, Christian McCaffrey's there. So if he doesn't get MVP, then give him most valuable offensive player of the year. Tyreek Hill did miss some time, and CeeDee Lamb had a couple of games that we could point to, but Christian McCaffrey was consistent through it all, had a full season of touchdowns. Can't place that either. And then also, like, if Lamar Jackson wins the MVP, he shouldn't also win Offensive Player of the Year. No. I think that's ridiculous. If you're going to make the MVP the quarterback award, then you can't do the same thing and have him also take the Offensive Player of the Year.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think with Christian McCaffrey, it's like he's been the most dominant offensive player from start to finish.
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a fair case there. So I would go Christian McCaffrey there as well. So I would have him taking the MVP and the Offensive Player of the Year. Probably the first player in history to do that outside of Adrian Peterson, I believe was the last person who did it. And then Defensive Player of the Year. I know you're excited to talk about who is on the list because it's none only than friend of the show, Deron with a capital R in the middle of his name, Bland.
Yeah, I mean, we've been saying it all year, Defensive Player of the Year, Deron Bland. We saw that Seahawks game. We saw how much of a Defensive Player of the Year he was. Or should I just say defensive person on that team? Defensively guarding the end zone or defensively trying to chase after, DK Metcalf and other players there. So he's a defensive player. That is for sure. Whether he's the best defensive player, that is another conversation.
Yeah.
Also, we have Max Crosby.
Shout out to Max. Yeah.
We love Max Crosby.
He's killing it. I like everything Max Crosby's about. He has a good interview with Sean Strickland. They're kind of talking about how they've overcome some like childhood issues, whether it's with addiction or struggling with other substance abuses. He's someone who's really set the standard for just being someone who goes out, gets after it, and just being an all-around great athlete. So shout out to Max Crosby for being on this list. I don't think he is the Defensive Player of the Year, but I'm glad to see him showing up here. Then we have Myles Garrett and Micah Parsons, 2 dominant defensive players, but haven't really shown up for their teams in the big spots when they needed them. I know Myles Garrett had a lot of great moments earlier in the season, but kind of fizzled out here. Would you pick either of those over TJ Watt, who's also on this list?
If we're going to argue any of the two, I would argue Myles Garrett, just because of how great that defense was and how much it carried them when they were going through all that quarterback turbulence. And I know that towards the end of the season, he was facing a lot of different injuries. And I think that's part of the reason why he's slowed down.
Yeah.
If there's anybody, I think, who is the Defensive Player of the Year who isn't TJ Watt, it's probably Myles Garrett, because we joke about Deron Bland being Defensive Player of the Year. He won't be. Max Crosby had a great season. He won't be either. And Micah Parsons certainly won't be unless of the media really hyperrates that there. So I'd say Myles Garrett.
Yeah.
If it's not TJ Watt.
Yeah, if Micah Parsons wins, there should definitely be an investigation into that.
Yeah, 100%.
But after that, let's go down to Coach of the Year, and that'll be our last segment. Do you want to go over the rookies?
Let's go over the rookies too. Why not? The offensive rookie of the year is probably more, I would say it's a lot more legit than even the MVP, honestly, because everybody there deserving. We have Jahmyr Gibbs, we have Sam Laporta, we have Puka Nacua, Bijan Robinson, CJ Stroud, and all of these guys are very deserving of it. I think the least deserving, only because of how he was utilized, was Bijan Robinson, but he showed he's a
Yeah.
monster. And when Raheem Morris actually uses him correctly this year, we'll see how great he really is. So some of these guys here were record breaking. Sam Laporta, most receptions by a tight end as a rookie. We had Puka Nacua break basically every single wide receiver record for a rookie. And then CJ Stroud turned what was the 4-13, 4-13, 4-13 Houston Texans into a powerhouse and a team that could challenge the Chiefs, Ravens, and all the other teams in the AFC for years to come.
Yeah, I think with CJ Stroud, he should definitely be the rookie of the year just with everything he did at the quarterback position and how valuable he was for his team. But when I look at all of these guys, I think of who the most dominant player was from start to finish. It's Puka Nacua. And I love Jahmyr Gibbs. I love Sam Laporta. And even Bijan Robinson was dominant at times earlier in the season. But start to finish, Puka Nacua balled out. He broke receiving yard records after receiving yard records, whether it's the rookie receiving record or it was the single game receiving record in a playoff game for a rookie against the Lions. And Puka Nacua, in spite of losing that game, still balled out. He was still dominant. And in spite of Cooper Kupp being added on that team, he's like, hey, I know you had your thing with Stafford and he loves throwing to other receivers, but he kind of likes throwing it to me now. And I'm a younger, faster, more athletic version of you. So I think I'm going to take this thing, take some pressure off of you, old man, let you recover from your injuries, and still be the number one guy that Matthew Stafford targets on that team. And then when Cooper Kupp came back, it was a little clunky at first, but he eventually got better at the end of the season. So I would go with Nacua.
Yeah, I think with all the records that he had the greatest wide receiver season of any rookie in NFL history. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility for him to win it. And I think that like even CJ Stroud, he had some games where he struggled. He did lose to the Panthers, which I still think is something to look at. So I think Puka Nacua is probably the most deserving, but it's probably going to be CJ Stroud.
Yeah, probably going to be CJ Stroud. And hopefully he wins Rookie of the Year. But I think Puka Nacua definitely deserves to be the Offensive Rookie of the Year. But let's shift to defense because there is other side of the ball that gets drafted in the NFL. We have Will Anderson from the Houston Texans, who was leading the league in pressure success rates, and he was up there pass rushing wise with the likes of Myles Garrett and TJ Watt, even better at points of the season than Micah Parsons, battling through a sprained ankle, I believe, and he was still dominant in the playoffs and versus the Colts. Then we have Jalen Carter. He played well and showed a lot of flashes early in the season. Then he kind of fizzled out, and I didn't hear his name called during any Eagles games. And then we had Joey Porter Jr. Had that interception on Lamar Jackson that ended up sealing the victory and allowed Kenny Pickett to win the game to George Pickens. So he's had some good moments. And then Kobe Turner and Devon Witherspoon.
Yeah, so I think the clear winner here for me has to be Will Anderson. He showed up in the playoffs. He showed up in the regular season. He immediately stepped in and became one of the best edge rushers in the NFL. So, I mean, all these other guys have been great. Don't get me wrong. I like Devon Witherspoon a lot, and I like some of the other guys we mentioned. But Will Anderson, of all the rookies, is the one that stood out the most because that defense, of which last year was middle of the pack, stepped up and became a really solid defense. So I think that it's got to be Will Anderson.
Yeah, I think it has to be Will Anderson as well because you had the second and the third pick of CJ Stroud and Will Anderson, and they had equal impact on each side of the ball, respectively. And I think just with how often he was able to succeed with pressures, he was a game wrecker for that defense. And I feel like from start to finish, he was the most dominant player, similar to Puka Nacua there. So I would give it to Will Anderson as well. But excited to see all five of these guys in future NFL seasons dominate there. Then we have the most controversial topic, probably outside of the MVP conversation, outside of slandering Brock Purdy, is the comeback player of the year conversation. And then to start this one, we have Joe Flacco. Okay, he came back, but if they don't give it to him, I can understand because it was kind of in the middle of the season. He played a
Week
little
13.
bit. Yeah, week 13. He played a little bit with the Jets. So if we want to go with like the NBA having that threshold of games, I could see why you wouldn't want to give it to him. But if he did play the whole year, he may have very well been the MVP for that team.
55 touchdowns, 33 picks potentially.
Yeah, potentially. And then we have DeMar Hamlin on this list. He only played 164 snaps. Like, I think he died on the field, came back from that. So he literally came back to life here. So, I mean, the fact that he died, was off on an ambulance, and then we didn't know his status for a couple hours. And then we finally got the good news that he was still alive, even though he was part of the Bills' worst play call of the year in that fake punt. I won't hold that against him, but he still didn't play this season. And he kind of like, I don't know, he only played 164 snaps.
Yeah, I have a lot of takes, and we'll go through the rest of the comeback player of the years real quick too, because this is a list. The comeback player of the year is actually one of the most bullshit comeback player of the year awards of recent memory. Last year, it was clearly Geno Smith because of everything that happened.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go through the rest of them real quick to show you why I'm not a fan of them. We have Tua Tagovailoa, who came back from having a headache. Great. We have Matthew Stafford, who came back from hurting his elbow. Give me a break.
Yeah.
And then Baker Mayfield came back from just playing poorly in Carolina. But I think he really is the comeback player of the year. I would pick Baker Mayfield.
Yeah.
Joe Flacco came back from retirement, basically. And then we have DeMar Hamlin, who came back from death. So that's the basic summary of the comeback player of the year. And DeMar Hamlin, I'm happy that he came back, and I'm glad that he did, and it's inspiring that he did. But you didn't play.
Yeah.
You played 100 snaps your entire season, okay?
Yeah.
And you had 2 tackles. And I know people in the comments are going to say, you're a monster. You're an asshole. How could you make fun of this guy who died on the field?
You're not.
I'm not making fun of DeMar Hamlin. I'm making fun of the fact that he's comeback player of the year. Give him a special award.
Yeah.
Give him the back to life award. Give him the Jesus award, coming back from the grave.
Left behind.
Give him the left behind award.
Yeah.
Give him, I don't know, make a song about him or something.
Yeah.
Baker Mayfield should be comeback player of the year. He was statistically one of the worst quarterbacks in NFL history last year. And then he comes back, goes to Tampa Bay, who has to overcome the shoes of Tom Brady, overcome a former Super Bowl roster. And then he goes in there, he balls, wins their division, wins a playoff game, and has a great game against the Lions as well. So I think that he's more deserving. I think that really this conversation should it be comeback player of the year and most improved, because in this case, DeMar Hamlin would be comeback player of the year.
Yeah.
And most improved would be Baker Mayfield at this point.
Yeah, and it's like, I feel like you should have to come back from like a season-ending injury and like play the full season. And like with DeMar Hamlin, well, I like his story. I think like honorable mention DeMar Hamlin would be fine for this award, because I see a lot of people like, hey, this guy didn't even play this year. And then we just have to point out the reality of the situation that he didn't play and he only had 2 tackles and he was involved in one of the worst play calls in NFL history this postseason. And that's Sean McDermott's fault, but I guess it's important to have him on this list just to remember what happened, and we're glad DeMar Hamlin is back. And then for me with Baker Mayfield, it's like, you came back from, okay, you're the worst statistical quarterback of all time in Carolina when it came to QBR. He had one of the lowest ratings sequentially in order, and then looks like it was mostly the Panthers' fault. But then he came back with the Rams and was pretty good already. So it's like with this season, I don't think you're really overcoming a Super Bowl roster, because that helps you when you have really good teammates around you come back and be better. And he played on par to what he did in Cleveland, and he was statistically one of the better quarterbacks in the league this year. And then Tua, it's like, okay, he had a concussion. And then Stafford, it's like, why is he on this list at all? And then Joe Flacco actually came back from retirement, and he came back and played really well. And if he played, he probably would have been the MVP this year. But it's like, how about Odell Beckham Jr.? I feel like OBJ should be on this list of someone like who actually left and came back and who was really good this year and who was a legitimate surprise. If we're going to use like the Geno Smith, it's like OBJ like sat out. I had no idea what to expect from OBJ. I didn't expect him to play a full season, and I would rather have him on this list than Tua, because Tua played last year. He's not really coming back from anything. Same with Stafford. I mean, he went out and players get hurt at the end of the season, and Baker Mayfield didn't come back from from anything. He just came back from being the worst quarterback in football. And then Joe Flacco and DeMar Hamlin didn't play enough. It's like OBJ played every single game and was very effective for the Ravens once they opened up the offense.
Yeah, I think the only thing that Tua was really coming back from was those concussions that he had. But I don't think I don't know. Is it bad for me to say that I don't think that's enough for comeback player of the year? Because I feel like maybe it's not.
Yeah.
I would pick Baker Mayfield, but I think it's because he had similar arcs to Geno Smith, where if we're going to give Geno Smith comeback player of the year, we can give Baker Mayfield, because I think of all those guys, I think he's the most valuable.
Yeah.
Still very confused with why Matt Stafford's on here, because I'm not sure what he came back from. He had
Yeah.
an elbow injury. I don't know. He thought about retirement at 35, which is very normal.
Yeah.
But I don't think he came back from very much, except for an injury.
What about John Mechie?
John Mechie, he had cancer.
He had cancer.
Leukemia.
Like, if we're just going to put DeMar Hamlin on this list because of what happened, can we put the guy who survived cancer on this list if we're going for feel-good stories as well?
Yeah, I think that's perfectly fine.
I feel like they put no thought into this whatsoever. Like,
no.
Who even came up with this list? Next year, I'm petitioning that the Brickyard does it, because not only do we have the most accurate list, not only do we have the unsealed documents, but we would come up with a much better comeback player of the year list than this garbage.
Now, that being said, who will win comeback player of the year?
Shoot, DeMar Hamlin, probably.
DeMar Hamlin's probably going to win it.
Yeah. DeMar Hamlin or Joe Flacco. I think it's a toss-up between either of them. I lean DeMar Hamlin just because of the storyline, but I think Joe Flacco might win it just because he actually put a product on the field, and he was kind of a national treasure for the weeks that he played during the regular season. But
must watch football.
I just think that playoff game kind of ruined it for him since he was so bad.
Yeah. I also think that all the media members, it's going to be hard for them to not pick DeMar Hamlin.
Yeah.
Just because of the story. It was a pretty severe story, and obviously what happened to him was a tragedy. So it's going to be him.
And then we have our last award section here, and that is the Coach of the Year section. And this is probably one of the most competitive Coach of the Years I can remember in a long time here, where it was so bad they had to give it to Brian Daboll, who, I don't know, was a wild card team and he couldn't even win his division. But that's just how low the bar is when you have Daniel Jones as your quarterback. You're like, wow, this guy is so good that he overcame the atrocity that is Daniel Jones playing quarterback in the National Football League and led his team to the playoffs. How great is that? But this year, we actually have guys who won their division. We actually have guys who had good quarterbacks on their team. And then we actually have guys who won 11 games. And Kevin Stefanski, who's on this list, who went through not one, not two, not three, but 4 quarterbacks and was the first coach to get his team to the playoffs, going through 4 starting quarterbacks. So Kevin Stefanski, definitely deserving. Kyle Shanahan, he's the 1 seed, has the best roster, and statistically, his team was pretty much top 5 in offense and defense. So can't really go wrong there. D'Amico Ryans, I mean, this team is 3 years ahead of schedule. I mean, you're expecting this year 3. He had the cojones to go out there, get Will Anderson and CJ Stroud, and he won a playoff game. So I think D'Amico Ryans definitely deserving there. And it's hard to argue against the first 3. Then John Harbaugh, again, the 1 seed, went out there and got Todd Monken, had some self-awareness that, hey, maybe we can unlock something else in Lamar. And then he went, got another offensive coordinator. Offense looked completely different this year, looked completely awesome this year. And then John Harbaugh's like, hey, I should be in this because we are the best team in the AFC until we run into the Chiefs. And then, of course, the sweetheart, America's favorite coach, Daniel Campbell. He probably won't win it because of those, it's not supposed to count, but those 2 4th down conversions. It seems like the entire media went knives out for Dan Campbell immediately. But with what he did with Detroit, he gave the Lions their best year of all time. He fixed Jared Goff. He changed the entire culture of that organization. He got them to a conference championship when the over-under on their wins were 9.5. Everyone thought the Dallas Cowboys were the second best team and not the Detroit Lions, when they clearly have better weapons. They clearly have better coaches around them, and they clearly had a better quarterback and a better coach.
Yeah, I think that of these 5, the 2 that I would take out is the Ravens and the 49ers. In this case, Kyle Shanahan and John Harbaugh. Not because they didn't have a great season, but what did we expect from them going into this season? Because Kyle Shanahan had the best roster going into it. We knew that. And with the Ravens, we saw that team. We're like, okay, well, that defense looks amazing, and that offense has Lamar Jackson and all this other great talent. they should be competing for the AFC title game. And that's exactly what they did. So they met expectations. All these other guys exceeded expectations by a long shot. The Lions over under this year was 9, and they had what should have been 13 wins if you count that Cowboys debacle. And then obviously, winning the most games they had since the 60s, winning 2 playoff games for the first time since 1957, winning their first playoff game since the early 90s, obviously overcoming a lot of obstacles there.
Amen.
With the Texans and D'Amico Ryans talking about 4-13, 4-13, 4-13. And then what do? They go out, make the playoffs, and win a playoff game. If we're talking about CJ Stroud for Rookie of the Year, we got to say the same thing for D'Amico Ryans. And lastly, Kevin Stefanski, the handsome man that is Kevin Stefanski, overcoming 4 quarterbacks. And not just 4 quarterbacks. We're talking PJ Walker, DTR. As you say, DTR needs CPR. We have Deshaun Rapist. And then we have Joe Flacco. So he had to overcome quite a lot. And then their team literally falling apart, 30% of the roster being on the IR. I think Kevin Stefanski should win Coach of the Year.
Yeah, I think Kevin Stefanski has a case there, especially with everything he overcame. But in my opinion, I still have to give it to Dan Campbell. I think he should win Coach of the Year because Kevin Stefanski has won Coach of the Year. He did with the Browns what Dan Campbell has done, but Dan Campbell has taken his team further. Kevin Stefanski still had technically a better roster than the Houston Texans and lost in that playoff game. Dan Campbell got to the conference championship. His team was still under 9.5 wins there. And the fact that he gave Detroit their best season, I think Dan Campbell definitely deserves it. And especially with what he's done in year 1 to year 2 to year 3, now being this dominant team with putting Ben Johnson around him, putting Aaron Glenn around him, and Brad Holmes, the GM. I just think Dan Campbell definitely deserves this, especially with everything the Lions have gone through over the past few years. I think Campbell deserves to take it home, but I understand why you would give it to Kevin Stefanski because you look at him too, it's like 4 quarterbacks, and then he went out there, he got Schwartz, and he added them to the defensive staff there to take that defense to the next level. Didn't end up working out in the playoffs, but still had a great run, made history with the Cleveland Browns in a similarly cursed organization where we talk about same old Browns, and Kevin Stefanski has kind of erased that, where now they're going out there and winning it. People aren't saying, oh, it's the same old Browns now. They're like, oh, the Browns show up to town and it's going to be a tough physical football game, and you're actually not sure who's going to win. And Kevin Stefanski has still done that, what Dan Campbell has done for Detroit, for Cleveland. But I think if any of these guys gets it, I'm not really going to have a problem with it. If John Harbaugh and Kyle Shanahan got it, I'd kind of be like, okay, that's a safe pick, but I get it. But all of these guys are deserving.
Yeah, I think this is a great Coach of the Year, inoffensive list. You have Dan Campbell, I have Kevin Stefanski, but both of them I think should be 1 and 2 respectively.
Yeah, both of them should be 1 and 2 respectively. And then after the awards, we had Micah Parsons on that awards, and there's kind of a civil war now going on with the Dallas Cowboys fans. And we talk about how if you're a fan of a team, but if you criticize a player on the team or you point out how they had a bad game, you point out things that they can improve on, suddenly you're labeled a fake fan, suddenly you're labeled a pretender. And when people think of Skip Bayless, they don't think fake Cowboys fans. They think of the most creative ways and the most cartoonish ways possible for talking yourself into how a team could get to and win a Super Bowl when they haven't gotten there since VHS tapes were the main consumption of media on a television, and you still had the pixels all scribbly there. You still had the rainbow across your screen sometimes. You still would hear that noise when the VHS tape is jamming, and you're like, oh, is this stuck in here forever? That's the last time the Dallas Cowboys have won it, and Skip Bayless has been there making up excuses for them, making up reasons why you can get there for year in and year out. But Micah Parsons goes out there. He has this podcast now. He's doing his Draymond Green thing in the media, and he's like, hey, I'm 24 now. I've been in the league for 3 years. I've pretty much seen anything. And then first of all, Skip Bayless is like, you're 24 years old and you've seen everything? First of all, that's a bad mentality. And no, you haven't seen everything. And then he's like, I feel like it's time for us to go all in, and it's time for us to get to that next step to win a Super Bowl. And then Skip Bayless is like, okay, Sure, we can go all in. We can go out there and win a Super Bowl. However, you've played in 4 playoff games and you've gotten 1 sack. And when you talk about opportunities of going all in this year, it's like it was really just the Darius Leonards of the world, who didn't really work out for Philadelphia. So there wasn't a ton of different things that they could have done. And then Micah Parsons, um, comes back at Skip Bayless, and he's basically saying, "You're just hating right now." He's like, "You're mad that I won't do your show, and then you keep asking me week in and week out to be on your show every Tuesday." He's basically like, "You are lame as fuck, Skip, fake ass Cowboys fan." When Skip Bayless just pointed out, you've been in the league 3 years. No, you haven't seen everything. And then also, you're the leader on the defense. You have to step up. You can't give us 1 sack in 4 playoff games when you're claiming to be the best player in football, and you're claiming that you have not just defensive player of the year aspirations, but Tony Romo was talking about how Micah Parsons said he wants to be the MVP. And you go out there and you give 1 sack in 4 playoff games.
Yeah, my issue I have with Micah Parsons is not his skill level and not his talent, and not that he's not a great player or a defensive player of the year eligible player. The problem I have with him is when he says shit like this.
Yeah.
You've been in the league for 3 years, dude. You have not seen everything. Tom Brady was on Pat McAfee. We talk about, he said probably around year 10 is when I felt like I saw everything. That's when he had that famous quote where, "I feel like I've seen anything. You can throw anything at me and I've seen it." Well, 3 years to 10 years, obviously he has not seen everything, and that includes an NFC title game. 4 games, 1 sack. That goes on your performance there. And I know that defensive debacle that they had wasn't all on Micah Parsons, but he has some bit of blame there. So does Deron Bland. So does some of the other guys. But Micah Parsons is the glue of that defense, and he didn't do it there. Another problem I have with Micah Parsons, and what I've noticed ever since he's launched his podcast, and this might sound like it's a shot, but it's not, insecurity and immaturity, specifically. 24 years old, saying all this game he had. He always talked about how the Cowboys were right there with the 49ers and right there with the Eagles, putting his team's foot in his mouth and putting it in situations where he just kind of sounds foolish, and he does sound foolish here as well. It's like he has a bit of an immaturity problem, I feel like, with Micah Parsons. Very talented, but I don't like this from him. And also going at a Cowboys legend in Skip Bayless, a guy who's been on your side through everything for the last 40 years, like calling him a fake fan is disingenuous. And also what he's saying was really not that crazy either.
Yeah. He's just like, yeah, you've been in the league for 30 years and you haven't seen everything, but like you want to talk about like making a game changing move and like going out there and getting the talent you need when you have the talent on your team right now. Everyone was saying that you're the team to beat outside of the San Francisco 49ers. Everyone had you number 2. We knew the Packers were going to beat you. We both picked the Packers to beat you, but everyone else had the Cowboys matching up with the San Francisco 49ers in the conference championship. People were picking you to go to the Super Bowl. So the fact that you're like, we need to go out there and make a big move when you're backtracking on your statement that like, even though we got beat 42-10, we're still right there with the San Francisco 49ers. And then you can still point to games where you had an easy schedule and it's going to get tougher. And then you can point to the 1 sack in 4 games. But this culture and these NFL fans and players who are like, if you point out valid criticism with that team, you're either a hater or you're a fake fan. It's like, okay, well, I can't refute what you said, so you're just a fake Cowboys fan, when I've seen Skip Bayless pull the most cartoonish things out of his ass to somehow legitimize the Cowboys in his mind to win. Skip Bayless like is the most ride or die fan of anyone I've ever seen, but anytime you're objective with your team, anytime you point out a simple fact or a simple truth with your team, you're suddenly labeled a fake fan or a hater. Like, it's so cheap, and it's mostly just the people like, oh, you're a this, you're a that. It's just a name calling. It's just a cheap like, oh, well, you must be one of these people. I'm going to generalize you in this group with everyone else. And it's like, okay, you don't have enough ammo to refute his point, so you're just going to call him out and call him a fake Cowboys fan. It's like, no, he's been a diehard Cowboys fan, and he makes up the most outrageous opinions, and he's known for being blind because of his Cowboys fanhood and just blindly picking you. It's like he's one of the most dedicated Cowboys fans I've ever seen, and he's gone through so much pain and misery, and he's like, yo, you're the favorite. You're the team to beat outside of the San Francisco 49ers. A lot of people had you going to the Super Bowl. You're a heavy betting favorite. And then you win out there and you've had some disappointing moments where you don't show up and you haven't been the guy to make a play, where we see Aaron Donald make the plays. We see Chris Jones make the plays. We see TJ Watt. Even though they lost to the Kansas City Chiefs, he opened up that game with a fumble return for a touchdown, making big plays in his playoff debuts. Like, all of the best defensive players have a signature moment in the playoffs, and you're still a young player, but you haven't seen everything.
No, you haven't at all. And then not only that, I know that Skip Bayless was very critical of them keeping Mike McCarthy and keeping Dak Prescott, kind of staying with everything here, even though they underperformed in the playoffs for what feels like the last 25 straight years. And even just with Mike McCarthy, what's been the last 3 years, him being critical of that. Being critical of a team is not being a bad fan. I think it's being a good fan, because you're pointing out what they actually need. For Patriots fans, saying they have bad receivers is not being a bad fan. It's being truthful about what's going on there. For the Bills, if we're talking about being a Bills fan, being critical of Sean McDermott and some of the issues he's had on defense is very valid for someone who would be a Bills fan. And the list can go on with every team.
Yeah.
Valid criticisms. And for Micah Parsons here, he's the guy in the comments that will call you a casual for saying this guy over this guy, or, examples of that. Instead of arguing with you about your point, just calls you a casual, or calls you a fake fan, or says that you're an idiot.
Yeah.
Lame example, lame excuse, and Micah Parsons, you have a lot of growing up to do.
Yeah. I don't think I think that's fair, but he also can go on his podcast. He can defend himself, but you also have to be able to self-reflect and be in the mirror. And I'm it's the kind of the line when players have podcasts when they're still playing, is they kind of use it as a way just to defend themselves. Even when you had a bad performance, you have to be like, hey, yeah, I didn't have my best game and I'll do better in the future. But you have to take all that criticism that comes with it, and that's part of being a star in the NFL. So kind of an interesting beef, and it's kind of a lot more chaos and a lot more turmoil going on within the Dallas Cowboys organization, especially with them keeping Mike McCarthy. You're not going to have the easiest schedule in the NFL next year, so excited to see how this offseason continues to unfold. And then we also have some more things with the offseason continuing to unfold, and that is how the Pro Bowl affects the career of Tua and Jalen Hurts. So we had the worst event in the NFL that happens year in and year out. Actually, probably the worst event that happens in sports, because most people would rather watch cricket, rather watch rugby, rather watch professional tag.
Watch paint dry.
Yeah, rather watch paint dry than the atrocity that is the Pro Bowl. It's mildly entertaining content for elementary school age kids who are drinking orange juice and eating shell or Kraft mac and cheese watching the TV. They're like, oh, I know that guy. He's a famous player. Look at Eli Manning with the cringiest raps I've ever seen. Wow, so entertaining. But the real storyline coming out of it was Dan Orlovsky, who hasn't played since 2012, off the couch.
Just about.
It's basically like if Delonte West went into the NBA and then took down Damian Lillard and Chris Paul at their respective ages in their prime. And then Delonte West was the guy that's like, yeah, I went out there. I did that. He's not the best and brightest of the NBA. Same with Dan Orlovsky. He's known for running out of the end zone, being on the 0-16 Lions, being one of the worst commentators on ESPN when he's saying that Caleb Williams is Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, and Patrick Mahomes all in one quarterback, and then saying all of these ridiculous things on TV, and you let him come off of his couch and beat you in a precision passing competition when Tua is known for, oh, he's so accurate though, right? And then Jalen Hurts, he's kind of just, well, you had that one really good year when you got to the Super Bowl, and then this year was very confusing. Maybe you're dealing with some injuries, but if you're dealing with injuries, why are you even at the Pro Bowl to begin with? You should be rehabbing and training, doing everything you need to do to become that elite MVP caliber player again. So in my mind, I'm just like, how can you believe in either of these guys when you lose to Dan Orlovsky? It's like confidence way down, especially when Tua is known for being accurate.
No, this speaks more to the Pro Bowl and everything wrong with the Pro Bowl. We talked about it when we started the show. I deliberately worked on Sunday, which is a very big no-no. My work knows very much, don't ever schedule me or never ask me to work on Sunday. But this time, I volunteered. I said, you know what? This gives me a reason not to watch the Pro Bowl because the Pro Bowl is awful. You decided to go skiing because you're like, you know what? I'd rather go skiing in the freezing cold than watch the Pro Bowl. I
Yeah.
would rather pull nails out of my asshole, if that's even a thing. Because the Pro Bowl is so bad and it's such an embarrassment to not only the NFL, but just to the four major sports as a whole. You're talking about all these other all-star games, the NBA, much watched basketball, baseball, hockey, all of these sports know what they're doing with the all-star game. But the NFL, the biggest brand in sports, the Super Bowl, one of the biggest spectacles in all of sports and even all of media. And then there's the Pro Bowl a week
Yeah.
before, and it's a joke. We're talking about Gardner Minshew, Tua, and all these other guys that come into there who either just maybe didn't deserve to be all stars, or maybe they just are there because no one else is there. Because obviously, you're not going to see Patrick Mahomes there. Obviously, you're not going to see the other guys who played deep into the playoffs. It's terrible. And then to top it off, you have a career backup, Mr. 0-16, Mr. runs out of the end zone, Mr. Detroit Lion, Mr. 2-13 as a starter, Mr. 15 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, guy Dan Orlovsky, say what you will about him, comes in and outperforms somebody in a skills competition of Tua, who was an MVP candidate,
Yeah.
and Jalen Hurts, who was second in the MVP last year, comes out there and beats them both. Proves to me why I didn't watch the Pro Bowl, why you went skiing, and why
Yeah.
the Pro Bowl fucking sucks.
Yeah, the Pro Bowl is awful, and like even with the NBA, you can be like, well, the game's not that good. It's like, well, the 3-point competition is fun. That's interesting.
Dunk contest is cool
The
too.
dunk contest has had some iconic moments throughout history, so the NBA does something right at least, even if their game isn't the most competitive. It's more of just the culture of where the NBA is at this point. But yeah, and it's kind of fitting that it's on the same night as the Grammys, where you're like, wow, the most very good but kind of mediocre talent going out there and accepting awards on stage. When people think of Taylor Swift, she's never going to make an album like Bohemian Rhapsody. She's never going to make something to the level of, say, like a All Eyes on Me from Tupac. Like you think about like the greatest albums of all time, and the Grammys are just like the modern day ones that win. You're like, oh yeah, Flower Shop with Macklemore over Jesus that year, over To Pimp a Butterfly that year, over J. Cole's, I believe that was Forest Hills Drive that year.
Yeah.
So you're thinking of like all these iconic albums that usually the most mediocre artist wins, or they're still giving awards out to AC/DC, the Black Keys every year. It's like, okay, did anyone actually listen to these albums? Or like, oh, that band's good, let's give them the award because they get the most streams. It's like, okay, there's a difference between an iconic album or someone just getting a lot of streams because their fans will listen to everything that they do, and also gyms, restaurants, and airports will play their music nonstop to rack up their streams because their record labels pay for them to be on playlists.
Yeah, and pay for them to be in the Grammys too.
Yeah.
Ask me this before I dive into my Grammys take. Would you rather watch the Grammys or watch the Pro Bowl?
Can I turn the sound off?
Yes.
Okay, I'd rather watch the Pro Bowl.
Okay, but it's not fair. It's competitive, right? The thing I have against the Grammys is it's not quite to who they nominate, because who they nominate is just the record company saying, hey, this is what I think qualifies as the album. So
Yeah.
that's a load of shit. That goes to the hot, the most popular album. It's a popularity contest. The problem that I have with the Grammys is how pretentious the Grammys actually are.
Yeah.
Like with Thrift Shop, when they had Yeezus, they had Nothing Was the Same, they had Magna Carta, they had all these great albums where you look at albums of the last decade for rap albums and how much more prominent all the albums that were nominated that didn't win over Thrift Shop, over The Heist by Macklemore. Give me a break. And then there's plenty of examples in history of who wins over who. The Black Keys, the Black Pumas have won several Grammys. Nobody knows who they are. People where if the Grammys were like the Pro Bowl, where you're like, oh, well, this guy was a 15-time Pro Bowler, but nobody knows their name. It would be like if Jake Plummer had 17 Pro Bowls, and then you look at his resume, you're like, wait a minute, touch to interception ratio is 1. How is he a 17-time Pro Bowler? It's similar to that with the Grammys. We're like, I've never actually heard a Black Keys song, but for some reason they sound like something I would hear in Target.
Yeah.
And that ends up being this multi-time Grammy artist winning.
Yeah.
And then all the times, all these artists are just getting fucked over. People who genuinely deserve the award. It happens every time, whether it's Kanye, whether it's, name any artist. J. Cole. Kendrick Lamar. Kendrick Lamar got shafted Album of the Year when Damn was nominated. They lost to Bruno Mars.
It's like with Leo too losing
the Oscars.
Yeah, it's like, did people actually think Matthew McConaughey and Dallas Buyers Club was more interesting than Leo and Wolf of Wall Street? It's like, no,
it's a cult.
And the difference between like the Pro Bowl and the Grammys or the Oscars, watching something like that, is I don't have a bunch of pretentious people who are talking to me about human rights who benefit off of slave labor overseas with their phones, with your clothes, every designer thing that they wear that's expensive. It's like, yeah, typically there's slave labor going through that. There's a lot of human rights violations, but yes, please spread your message that you violate every single day when you talk. It's like the people who are talking about the climate, but they use their private jets. It's like, at least the Pro Bowl's not that pretentious, and it doesn't feel like they're talking down to people. And they're just saying things that they know everyone's going to cheer for. It's like, there'll be a headline like, oh, so-and-so was so bold, and they went out on a limb to speak about this topic that everyone in the room agrees with. Yeah. And it's like, if you say something different, then you're Chris Pratt, you talk about Jesus, and then everyone's like, oh, he's radioactive now.
Yeah, exactly. So the Grammys fucking suck. The Grammys don't mean anything. If you're telling me that I think the best album of the year is Midnight's, like, whether you're a Swiftie or whether you're not, like, that's not no, whatever. And then that's not even to get into the musical opinions of it. Every single year they will nominate all these great albums, or they'll nominate all these different albums here, and they always pick what nobody expects either. Whether it was the Heist is a very prominent example, whether it was, Public Enemy's most iconic album with I'm spacing on the name of it, losing to Will Smith, and all these other different examples of the Grammys fucking people over, getting a bunch of Grammy nominations to Shaka Khan.
Yeah.
It's just a joke. So that's why we don't take that very seriously.
Yeah, that's what we don't take it very seriously, but we do take new coaching hires in the NFL seriously. Speaking of new coaching hires, we had 2 jobs left, and one of them was in Washington. One of them was with the Seattle Seahawks. Who will they hire? Who will they not hire? And let's start in Seattle. They hired Mike Macdonald, who's the defensive coordinator for the Ravens, and you're like, who is Mike Macdonald? Because most people don't know who the coordinators on teams are if they're not diehard fans. Well, Mike Macdonald was a defensive coach for the Georgia Bulldogs in 2011 to 2013. Then he was an interim defensive coach for the Ravens in 2014. And then he was a defensive assistant from 2015 to 16. Then he was a defensive backs coach and then a linebackers coach. So basically with the Ravens for the majority of his career, 2014 to 2020. Then he went and coached with Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan Wolverines in 2021, and then he's been the Ravens defensive coordinator from 2022 to 2023. So definitely a lot of experience, been able to learn under Jim and John Harbaugh there. So it's an interesting hire. But I feel like there's a lot of defensive guys getting hired this cycle. I think Ben Johnson and Bobby Slowick were the preferred candidates, but there's unfinished business in Detroit. There's unfinished business in Houston. So there really has only been defensive candidates at head coach with those 2 guys withdrawing. So I think they did the best they could. And I think they ideally wanted Ben Johnson, but they pivoted to Mike Macdonald.
Yeah, I think with Mike Macdonald, you get a younger head coach, someone that you can have for a long time. Seattle historically is a little more patient with their head coaches. We saw how long they were with Pete Carroll. So I like the hire. I think that he's a good brain. He has the Harbaugh tree under him. And those Ravens defenses were really good. We look at the Seahawks defense and what they have with Tariq Woolen and what they have with Medbike and all these other guys that are on that team. And Devon Witherspoon, who's obviously Offensive Rookie of the Year candidate, is they have a really solid core there. And if they can just get somebody who can elevate them to that level, then I think that'll be a really nasty defense. and they're right there. I think Mike McDonald can do that for him, especially if they can hit on a few of their draft picks this year. So I like it. I think that they're in a good space. Now, what can he do
Yeah.
at the quarterback position? Whether it's keeping Geno for another year, maybe it's pivoting to somebody else. That's going to be his obstacle, but I think it's a good hire compared to the other hire that we'll go over in a second.
He's gonna bring not Brent Hundley. Brent Hundley with him. He's the backup for the Ravens.
Tyler Huntley.
Tyler Huntley. Yeah, he'll bring. I knew it wasn't Brent or Brett, but Tyler Huntley. Maybe he'll go the Seattle Seahawks. Has a little bit more ability than Geno Smith, but I think with Geno, it's like he's a fine quarterback. Can you see him in your Super Bowl vision? Not really, and I think it's been a good run, but he's really kind of coaching a young team here, a young foundation. But with Pete Carroll, it seems like everyone's heard the same stories, the same cliches. No one wants to listen to Macklemore anymore. So I think they did a good job pivoting. He has a lot of experience coaching under very good NFL coaches. So hopefully it works out for him, but I'll root for him in Seattle. So congrats to Mike McDonald. You got hired this year, and it's a fresh face in the NFL, unlike what the Washington Commanders decided to do, because they went out and they got Dan Quinn, who he was really good defensively for the Dallas Cowboys and was one of the hottest coaching candidates coming out of Seattle to Atlanta, but he still has the baggage of being the coach that blew that 28-3 lead in the Super Bowl. And then you're this defensive guru and you're being hired for your defense, right? You're being hired because you're this great mind on defense, yet you let Jordan Love score 48 points on you in Dallas, and they didn't even have the farm simulator.
Yeah. I have a feeling that this hire will be more of a sacrificial lamb. The thing that I'm worried about, so I think Dan Quinn's a fine head coach. Like, I think he'll be fine with them. But if you're talking about any of these guys, and I had my issues with the Falcons head coach when they hired Raheem Morris and some of these other guys, when you're going for your new franchise quarterback and you're trying to build around him, even though like a team like the Panthers might have failed with Frank Reich, you want to surround them potentially with an offensive-minded head coach, ideally. And for them, Sam Howell's not the answer. Neither is Jacoby Brissett. You're going to go out and get someone like, whether it's Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, or Drake May, it's going to be one of those three guys. And putting them with Dan Quinn better have a really good offensive coordinator. Oh, wait, he hired Cliff Kingsbury. Good luck.
Who pulled out the Raiders job. And like for a guy who we were like, oh, he doesn't want to come back to the NFL because he wants to stay in Thailand and keep robbing the Arizona Cardinals of the dollars that they gave him. And we're saying, don't pay Cliff Kingsbury. Don't play him yet. What the Cardinals do, they went out there, paid all this money, and he basically had a clause, I believe, until he got another head coaching job. They're still going to continue to pay him. So he's like, all right, I'm going to go and I'm going to have my own harem in the Philippines, basically, which more power to him. But like, you want to go from living, and you were talking about this with your friend last night, from the Philippines to Washington when you already agreed to be the offensive coordinator in Las Vegas.
This is how it's been. So he was at Texas with Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
And then he went to Arizona, beautiful state, obviously, with Kyler Murray. And then he goes to the Philippines, beautiful country, I assume. And then he comes back, and I'm assuming he's spending time in California because I think that's where he's from. And then you have an opportunity to be the offensive coordinator for the Raiders, obviously in Las Vegas, warm, beautiful, gambling city of Las Vegas, and Nevada as a whole, beautiful state. And then you rescind from that job to go to Washington, D.C., a city that was built for the politicians. I kid you not.
Yeah.
And to coach with Dan Quinn over Antonio Pierce, something that they're building in Las Vegas compared to what they're building in Washington, which is what exactly? What are they building? Maybe he was like, okay, well, Terry McLaurin and Brian Robinson, some good talent. But on the other side, you have Josh Jacobs and Devontae Adams and all this other talent.
Yeah.
So, like, this was very puzzling. And it also gives me a bit of a Josh McDaniels vibe with what he did with the Colts.
It's a little bit of a Josh McDaniels vibe. However, I can understand where Cliff Kingsbury would, maybe he's sitting alone in a room. He's still in the Philippines doing one of the Aaron Rodgers retreats. Maybe he had a little bit of mushrooms to help his joint pain, because that's what the fungi is for, right? He closes his eyes and he's like, wait a minute. I'd be going to the Raiders, who don't have the number 2 overall pick, who have Not only do they have Aiden O'Connell, but they have a quarterback who didn't complete a pass after the third quarter in a game and no real path to get another elite quarterback. Maybe you hit on someone like a JJ McCarthy in the draft, and it's possible, but he's like, there's the alternate universe where I get to coach Caleb Williams or Drake May, who are two top talents. And then we have all of this cap space on offense. And then hopefully we change the uniform. So if I hit it here, my best chance at getting another head coaching job is by being the guy who mentored either Caleb Williams or Drake May. And then when there's another head coaching opportunity for a young team that has the ability to get a quarterback, they'll be like, look what Cliff did with Caleb. Look what Cliff did with so-and-so, because he is the offense on that team. And Dan Quinn is definitely not.
Yeah, I mean, they used that to him. That's why he got the job in Arizona. It's like, look what he did with Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
So it is very telling there. So I think it's probably the right recipe. With the Commanders, I feel like it's a wait and see thing here. Do I think that he is better than Ron Rivera, that being Dan Quinn? Yes, I do think he's a better head coach. I think his marbles are there a little bit more. Ron Rivera, we forget that he was on the Bears 86 roster.
Jesus.
Remember how long the 80s were? We're in 2024. It has been 40 years since that team, and he's still doing great. I mean, he's in his late 70s, early 70s, or whatever it is. But I think it's an improvement from Ron Rivera, but it's going to be really interesting to see. They have a lot of holes to fix. Dan Quinn was fine in Atlanta, but he has that 28-3 lingering.
Yeah. You get the quarterback, though. So I think potentially I may pick the Commanders to be that dark horse team to maybe make the playoffs or win the division next year. I just need to see what they do in the draft and free agency, but a lot of potential there, and we'll see what Cliff Kingsbury can do. Arthur Smith to Pittsburgh. He said, I have a relationship to build with Kenny Pickett. We're going to get to work. I said, if Najee Harris shows up with a cold and has a slight flu, he's not going to carry the ball today. And then also, I'm going to make sure that George Pickens forgets how to play football. I'm not going to use Pat Freiermuth. And if we draft a weapon in the top 10, I'm not going to know how to use him because we drafted Bijan, Kyle Pitts, Drake London, all in the top 10. Didn't use any of them. All of them underperformed when he was an offensive coach. However, Pittsburgh Steelers fans, they're saying that, hey, this is the guy who made Derrick Henry. Yeah, he's the one who made him 6'6" and an absolute tank in the weight room. But sure, he made Derrick Henry, so he's going to suddenly grow Najee Harris and increase his athleticism, and then he's going to turn Najee Harris into Derrick Henry. Haha.
Well, I think he's seen Space Jam. He knows about MJ's secret sauce. So maybe that's what he'll be using. But maybe he did. Maybe he was in the weight room with Derrick Henry when he was 14 and he was running and rushing for 3,000 yards in high school, and then ultimately at Alabama, and then ultimately for Tennessee. So there's very much a chance that he is a time traveler. He was in those Pop Warner teams, but anything, is possible. If I'm a Steelers fan, and more or less if I'm somebody who is looking fantasy-wise at any of the players who were on the Steelers roster, with how much they let me down last year and how much Arthur Smith fits into that equation of fixing them, we're screwed as a Steelers fan. Najee Harris, who edged everyone just enough this past 5-6 weeks of fantasy football where they're like, maybe Najee is going to turn it around. Right. And then George Pickens not being properly utilized in Pittsburgh. If you're looking at anybody fantasy-wise, look at Allen Robinson or somebody who's like 4th or 5th on the depth chart, because that's probably who's going to do the most production for Pittsburgh. I don't like this hire. I think that they should have waited. Arthur Smith is not the answer. I don't think he was a great head coach for Atlanta, but I also don't think he's a good offensive coordinator either.
And he was an offensive guru in Atlanta. You can blame it on Desmond Ridder, but Kenny Pickett hasn't looked great. I don't think Arthur Smith is the right guy for the job, and Mike Tomlin has struggled and has not had a good track record of hiring coordinators, and the front office had to tell him, hey, this guy who's your offensive coordinator and has been for the past few years that we've sucked, get him out of here. And they had to tell Mike Tomlin to do it. And now you hire Arthur Smith. Why? Please give me a reason why we should hire Arthur Smith, because he went 7-10, 7-10, 7-10. Didn't know how to use Kyle Pitts, who's supposed to be Calvin Johnson. Didn't use Bijan Robinson because he had a slight cough. And then he really didn't give him too many touches, or as many as he should. He would rather run it with Tyler Algier and Cordero Patterson. So I really don't see the appeal with Arthur Smith. And a lot of people are like, great hire. I'm like, okay, yeah, you know his name. That's why it's a good hire.
I think now, especially with Eric Bieniemy being gone, who would I rather have there, Eric Bieniemy or Arthur Smith? Eric Bieniemy knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
He knows look how great the offense looked for Washington, really like the first half of the season.
Yeah.
We had Sam Howell leading the league in passing. We had Brian Robinson going crazy. We had, Terry McLaurin doing great. We had Jahan Dotson doing great. And then obviously we know what he did in Kansas City.
Yeah.
You don't think he would have been able to implement all these guys properly? If I'm them, I say Arthur Smith, you can pound sand now. We have Eric Bieniemy. That's what I would do if I was them.
Yeah, especially like Eric Bieniemy is a much better coordinator. He's worked under Andy Reid. He hasn't gotten an opportunity to even be a head coach, but with what he did in Washington, he's the bad cop and he'll be hard on players. And Mike Tomlin likes to be the team-friendly head coach. He's had issues with players like Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, Martavius Bryant, Marcus Wheaton, now
Plaxico
George
Burress.
Pickens, Juju Smith-Schuster now, and it's like you've had personality issues in the locker room. You just bring in someone like Bieniemy who says, hey, no, it's my way or the highway. I'm going to get into dudes. I'm going to get into it with you on the sideline. So I think that would be a much better hire. And I'm not one of these people who is like every single year that is like, yes, it's time for Bieniemy to get a head coaching job, but should there be a world where he's not an offensive coordinator and Arthur Smith is? Absolutely not. So
no, not at all.
Hopefully they make the adjustment there. But yeah, that was pretty much everything we had for coaching matchups. And then we had some stories in the media where apparently there is still a debate between Jokic and Embiid, and self-proclaimed basketball guru and expert Stephen A. Smith. Everyone knows this is where Stephen A. excels because you can tell he has some like weaknesses when it comes to baseball, saying Shohei Ohtani can't be the face of baseball because he doesn't speak English. Or some of his NFL takes where he names NFL players that are on teams that haven't been there for 5 years. He's asked, who would you rather have at this point? Joel Embiid, who's played 68 games in the most, who hasn't been past the second round, who has lost to Trae Young in the playoffs. Who would you rather have, him or Nikola Jokic? And he was like, Joel Embiid. And I'm like, how are we still having this debate when it's clearly obvious that Joker elevates his team? Joker is a better passer. Joker is more efficient. Joker is a better all-around offensive player. And you can argue Joel Embiid is a better defender than Nikola Jokic, but one thing I do know is Nikola Jokic won't get shut out by Al Horford in the playoffs. And Nikola Jokic elevates his team's play around him where he has a better feel for the game. He took over all of those games in the playoffs this year. He got them to the finals and was simply the most dominant player in basketball. And then he had gotten to a conference championship previously and lost in the bubble against LeBron and Anthony Davis when they were both still respectively kind of in their prime. But he's been a better, more valuable player because he actually plays all season. He's not focused on individual awards. He's focused on being ready for the playoffs and giving his team the best chance to succeed, whether it's going for 10, 14, and 15, or whether it's going for 42, 20, and 10. It's like Jokic can do everything, and he clearly elevates his team a lot more than Embiid, where Embiid, you kind of have the stat stuffer question mark. You have the Celtics who swept him in a series with Brad Stevens, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. You have a complete no-show in game 6 versus the Celtics when you're up 3-2, and then game 7 against the Boston Celtics were
14 points.
And then everyone said it was James Harden's fault. But you haven't been able to get past the second round. You can't play more than 68 games in a season. And you get tired against Trae Young and the Atlanta Hawks when you still had, I believe, Tobias Harris and JJ Redick were still on that team.
Yeah, I think this is ridiculous. And this is where I love Stephen A. Smith just as like a figure in the media. Of all people, I trust him more often than not. But with this feels a little ridiculous at this point. Last year, if you wanted to debate it still, there was wiggle room for debate. You had Embiid as the MVP, but then inevitably we saw what happened with Joker in the playoffs. He went in, he dominated pretty much every single playoff series. He showed he was easily the best player on the court, even with some of the best players in the league. You saw Giannis and what he did against Giannis, and who was clearly the better player there. Joker's obviously the best player at this point. He can do everything you mentioned. He is the most efficient player, not just today, but arguably of all time at this point. His numbers match up with that. And we're talking about whether it be win shares, PER, whatever the numbers might be. He's the most efficient player in basketball right now. And he can do pretty much everything that Embiid can do offensively, but better. I guess Embiid is a more, physical specimen. And he's maybe more, if you want to make like big man comparisons, maybe he is more play style wise like Shaq. But at the same time, Joker has the playoff success that Shaq had, where Embiid doesn't. Embiid is closer to someone like a Tracy McGrady than he is someone like Shaq. Shaq won 4 titles. He had that big man. And it's not like he didn't have help either. We're talking about James Harden. We're talking about Jimmy Butler. Ben Simmons for the first part of his career, who was an all-star. And then for Joker, he's had people like Jamal Murray, who is a great player, maybe doesn't get the recognition he deserves, but not nearly to the same level as these guys. And then we're talking about the Will Bartons of the world and the Kenneth Faried and some of these other guys that he's had. Aaron Gordon and some of these other, Bruce Brown.
Michael Porter,
who refuses to pass the ball any chance he gets. So the help that Joker's had compared to Embiid, but then also success. He's made it to multiple Western Conference Finals, which Embiid has never made it to a single Eastern Conference Finals. So the conversation isn't there anymore.
Yeah.
So it's ridiculous. And shame on Stephen A. This is a guy who's been in the NBA media for over 30 years now.
Yeah.
What's the hate boner for Joker?
Yeah, I don't get why you would, you can't really give me a reason why you would rather have Embiid than Joker, because Joker obviously elevates his team more. You mentioned Joel Embiid, is Jamal Murray better than Jimmy Butler? No. He's not dropping 50-point triple doubles in the playoffs. He's not as dominant defensively. And the fact you couldn't win with him, James Harden dropped 46 points in that playoff series versus the Boston Celtics. And you've never been able to get over the hump versus the Celtics. And that was a playoff chance where when you weren't facing the Celtics and you had the chance to beat the Atlanta Hawks and go toe to toe with Giannis and prove who's the best big man in basketball outside of Joker, you end up losing to Trae Young and the Atlanta Hawks. Joker left no question in anyone's mind that he was the best player in every single playoff series that he was in. He's also a supercomputer on offense when it comes to IQ, passing, and the way he can dismantle a defense. It's you can put him in every single system and he'll succeed. And he doesn't have these massive letdowns that you can point to where he was clearly the better player and then he ended up losing that series.
Yeah, I agree. Within the playoff success, with the accolades, with everything else, Joker at this point would be the all-time player above him compared to Embiid, where Embiid, he's going to be a player that we remember fondly in the NBA, but he hasn't showed that he's an all-time great center yet, where he wouldn't be in that same conversation with Hakeem and Shaq and Abdul-Jabbar and all these other great big men that we've had.
Yeah.
Or even Dwight Howard. Dwight Howard at least made the finals. Joker, he's got 2 MVPs. He should have won the third one. And then he's already won a title and he's on pace for a second one. So right now, Joker's obviously there. And I don't really know why there's a conversation there. Yeah. And then the worst part with Embiid, and this was part of the present problem why I have him, is he's a guy that's definitely accolade driven. And we talk about, he's hurt. He's probably not going to play for much of the rest of the season. And he's complaining about the MVP games requirement, which now this year they implemented it 65 games or more in order to qualify for the major awards and obviously some bonuses as well. And he's complaining about it. And he's played 52 games this year?
Yeah. He's played more than he normally plays. The most games he's ever played. He's only played more than 60. I believe it's twice that he's played more than 65. Let me check here. Yeah, so he's had 2 seasons. He's played 66 and 68 games that he's gotten over that threshold. And basically, LeBron James and Draymond Green basically came out and were saying people are forcing Joel Embiid to play because he has to play through injuries to even qualify for these awards. When it's bro, the most important thing is being healthy for the playoffs. You already won your MVP last year. No one is questioning that you're one of the best players in basketball, but you need to get past not only a second round, but you need to get to the NBA Finals to be considered a Hall of Fame player. So maybe take a page out of Kawhi's book, but they're basically claiming that the media was criticizing Joel Embiid for not playing, and then for the MVP, Joel Embiid was taking it on himself to play through the injuries. But that's mostly a failure on the Philadelphia 76ers organization to say, hey, I know you want to win the MVP this year, but you playing more than 65 games is not going to help us win a championship. And if you need a rest where you don't want to be put in a situation where you need potentially season-ending surgery, that's what you need to do. We don't need you to try and push through injuries. So this is something that's on the Philadelphia 76ers organization, and Joel Embiid to have the self-awareness upon himself, and then everyone is freaking out that they have a 65-game threshold to qualify for an award. It's like you can miss 17 games and still be considered for award. Like that's pretty generous already. And I actually like that because it's meant to discourage load management. It's meant to incentivize players to play when they're taking off games they don't need to. And it's like Michael Jordan played 82 games every single year. All he did was win 6 NBA finals. And then they used to play every single game. Hockey players play every game. It's more physical than basketball. It's like, this is honestly a better thing for basketball, because if you can't play more than 65 games, I don't think you're the most valuable player in the league, because availability is one of the best abilities, especially when you have players like Giannis who go out there and play every night. Luka's going to go out there and play every night. He's not going to take games off. You don't see Jason Tatum resting, and then they load manage Porzingis, but that's just because he has injury issues. So if you need to take a load management stance, like, okay, it may affect your bonuses, but you'll be better for it in the playoffs. And I think if you can't play more than 65 games, you're not the most valuable player.
Yeah, exactly. And we think about it, think about the major awards in other parts of, different sports, right? In the MVP race last year with Mahomes and Jalen Hurts, ultimately, what did it come down to? Jalen Hurts got hurt the last 2 games of the season, and I do think that hurt his MVP chance because he wasn't there, and they saw them lose to the Cowboys and other teams as well. In baseball, Mike Trout at one point last year was favorites to win the MVP. He gets hurt, and obviously he's not in the conversation. You can't miss 30 games and then expect to be there. Baseball players who play 162 games, you'll see them sit out maybe a game or two, but they're also playing twice as many games, and there's way less of a percentage of them doing load management there, and that's in a different sport. For basketball, we have people who are paying 100, 200, 300, list goes on, amount of money to see their favorite players play, and then they just sit out last second. And it devastates the fans. And this is why the NBA is struggling with attendance, is because of injuries and load management. For this, I think inevitably they're going to lower the threshold. Maybe it's going to be 60 or whatever it might be, but like, I think having a requirement is a good thing. And that's why the MVP race is going to be a lot more competitive. We'll see someone like maybe SGA in the conversation now. We'll see maybe, some other people in that conversation, Joker and whatnot, in that conversation. With somebody who misses 20 games, they're not going to be in the competition because they missed a fourth of the season at that point.
Yeah, you missed a fourth of the season, and you need to be valuable by being there for your team. And it's like, it's a completely logical conclusion to come to when you have everyone who paid top dollar to see Celtics Lakers. It's a premier matchup, and then LeBron and Anthony Davis didn't even play. It's like, okay, if you're dealing with injuries, that's fine, and you shouldn't have to play through injuries, but don't expect to just be able to take time off and then go on and be an all NBA player when you had someone who played 70, 75 games. Like, that person is better than you because they had the stamina, and it's unfortunate you got hurt. But if you didn't play that many games, like, I'm fine with this, and I'm not really sure why LeBron and Draymond Green are pushing back on, because I know Tyrese Halliburton got hurt, so it may be 50-50 whether or not he's eligible, so players are gonna want to play more. Crazy. Yeah, players are actually going to want to play more and put themselves in harm's way to go out there just because they want to be all NBA. It's like, wow, players want to play more? What a crazy concept for the NBA. It's like, I'm on your side. If you are hurt, you should rest, but don't expect to go out there and then be, why am I not all NBA? Because you missed 20, 25 games, and this guy played 75 to 80 games, and you didn't even need to miss those.
Yeah, I mean, you think about the war of attrition in the NFL,
Yeah.
And all these people who who miss out on the Pro Bowl and all pro honors is because they miss time and they get hurt. It is a war of attrition, and it's unfortunate that that's what the sport is. But in
Yeah.
basketball, it's no different. Joel Embiid not going to have his 65 games. He's not going to be in the MVP discussion, but that's going to open the conversation up for people who were able to stay healthy through it all. And
Yeah.
I think it's going to encourage people to take better care of their body, which they're already at a great point at this point. But now we're not going to see all these stupid load management games that we see all the time. It's going to
Yeah.
be good for the sport at the end of it.
And if you want to do that, that's fine. But like Joker said, like, I'm not focused on MVPs and all NBAs. I'm focused on being the best version of myself going into the playoffs, which should be the focus instead of focusing on individual awards, which you should be focused on what's best for your team. And if that's taking off a night off and sacrificing your MVP, that's okay. And then with Joel Embiid too, I get why people compare him to Shaq with being able to put the ball on the floor and be a dominant big man. But when you're this brittle, or you haven't played 70 games in your career, and you can't get past the second round because not once, but twice, you get stopped by Al Horford. Like, if Shaq ever had a game where he got shut down by Al Horford of all people, like the world would end. People would question what the sport of basketball even meant anymore, and they'd be talking about a lot of things. They'd be talking about what it even means to play basketball anymore if Al Horford could stop the absolute machine that was Shaq. But Joel Embiid has repeatedly got shut down by Al Horford, and it's mostly just because he gets tired.
Yeah.
And Shaq went to not one, not two, not three, 4, 5 NBA finals, I believe, with Shaquille O'Neal. He's won 4, and you can't even get past the second round because you get tired. Oh, I'm sorry. Clint Capella, yeah, that's enough to slow you down. Al Horford, Robert Williams, like, there's a reason why Shaquille O'Neal talks about barbecue chicken, because when there's a little man on you, you take it to the paint and you throw it down on him. But like, if we're gonna compare Joel Embiid to Shaq, then Joel Embiid needs to start acting like Shaq and not get shut down by Al Horford, who's basically a senior citizen in the NBA at this point.
Yeah, I agree. If you're going to compare anybody to Shaq, if you talk about the last person outside of Joel Embiid that they compared to Shaq was Dwight Howard. And that's because for about a 4 or 5 year run, Dwight Howard was the most dominant big man in the NBA, leading the league in blocks and carrying his team, who outside of him was like Hito Turkoglu, Rashad Lewis, Jamal Lewis, like all these other people. Like
JJ Redick was on that team, right?
Yeah, they had a bunch of players. He carried his team to the finals. He had playoff success, and he won multiple playoff rounds because of it. And then obviously he went to the Lakers, and things changed from there. But if you're going to be compared to Shaq, you need to have the success along with it. We're talking about a top 10 player of all time, easily. You can't put Embiid there if you can't make it past the second round.
Yeah.
It'd be like if we're talking about, Josh Allen, and we're talking about the Bills, like he needs to make it to the finals before we can compare him to someone like a Steve Young or a all-time great, because they need to have that success, or else he's going to turn into a Dan Marino.
He's also whiny, and it like kind of makes him unlikable too, because like he was just like, I've never seen anyone complain their way to an MVP, but if there was that person, it would be James Harden and Joel Embiid. Because like James Harden legitimately got slighted, but like it was a toss up between Joker and Joel Embiid. And then we ended up seeing the playoff run that they both had respectively. And then in hindsight, people are like, oh, maybe I should have given it to Joker instead of Joel Embiid, because they're just giving it to him to give it to someone new. And then statistically, sure, did he have a better season? But Joker was the best player on the best team in the West that year. The Denver Nuggets were the number 1 seed when the Philadelphia 76ers were, I believe, the 3 seed in the East last year. And then he kind of just complains all of the time as well, which is another kind of like, if we're going to compare him to Shaq, like Shaq wasn't this whiny. Him and Kobe got into it, but Shaq was also a dominant personality comparatively. I know he's not like this person, and I'm not saying like character wise he's like this guy, but he was like a OJ Simpson, where they were bursting into the scene in Hollywood. How OJ was in Naked Gun, he was supposed to be the Terminator. Shaq was in Steel, he's in Grown Ups with Adam Sandler, where Joel Embiid kind of like his commercials aren't that good, and Shaquille O'Neal is still a better personality and was a better face of the league for the NBA as well.
Yeah, plus also let's not forget OJ was also a color commentator for CBS during primetime games as well.
Yeah, it's
So
like if anyone we need to bring back and like there's anyone we need to make excuses for and excuses for them being banned, like if Joel Embiid, like we can make excuses from him being banned from the MVP listing, like why can't we bring OJ back? Like
mhm,
OJ was nothing but a national treasure. He was supposed to be the Terminator. He was wrongfully convicted and then he was proven innocent of murder. The killer is still out there. We still don't know who he did it. The glove did not fit, and then they tried to arrest him for stealing back his Heisman Trophy, which I believe was stolen from him originally, and he was just
it's true.
taking it back. And then we go out there and disparage someone like OJ. We forget how much of an icon he was, but then we try and build up people like Joel Embiid who have never got it past the second round, complain their way to an MVP. Joker has clearly proven that he's better than him, yet the most iconic commentator in basketball today, Stephen A. Smith, is picking Joel Embiid, and then he wonders why JJ Redick eats his lunch every single time that they have a debate.
It's a disgrace. And ultimately, history will, as we are being history buffs here, we know where history will reside when their careers are respectively over, along with justice for the Brickyard. But we also want to be called the Brick Truth as well, because
The
that
Brick
is what we
Truth.
have become. OJ's name will soon be exonerated, and so will Joker when he goes on and has his success here.
Yeah.
Super Bowl greatness awaits us. So does NBA greatness and all the other greatness that we have in this world. So I say without further ado, we sign off. Enjoy the bowl. Enjoy the most super of bowls. And we'll be back
Yeah.
next week to break it down and everything that happened in that game.
Yeah, and most importantly, stay brick.